Once upon a time, in a town where the fog rolled in thick and the moonlight barely pierced through the clouds, there stood a grand hotel known as the Hotel of Lost Souls. It looked beautiful from the outside, with its tall towers and sparkling windows, but inside, it held a dark secret. Many people had come to stay there, seeking luxury and relaxation, but none had ever left. They say that if you check in, you might never check out again. Imagine a couple, excited for their vacation, driving through the misty roads, unaware of the chilling fate that awaited them. As they pulled up to the hotel, the air grew cold, and a strange feeling settled in their stomachs. They thought it was just the excitement of the trip, but little did they know, they were about to step into a world where the past and present collided in terrifying ways. Are you ready to hear their story? If you enjoy tales that send shivers down your spine, make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the couple entered the hotel, the grand lobby took their breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The front desk was empty, but a soft voice echoed from the back, inviting them to check in. They exchanged glances, a mix of excitement and unease swirling in their hearts. "Welcome to the Hotel of Lost Souls," the voice said, as a figure emerged from the shadows. The receptionist, a pale woman with sad eyes, handed them an ornate key. "Room 213 awaits you. Enjoy your stay." Her smile was warm, but there was something unsettling about her gaze. It felt as if she could see right through them. As they made their way to their room, the couple noticed that the hallways were eerily quiet. The walls were adorned with portraits of people dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their eyes following the couple as they walked by. The air felt heavy, as if the hotel itself was holding its breath, waiting. Once inside their room, they tried to shake off the strange feeling. They unpacked their bags and decided to explore the hotel. The couple wandered through the empty dining room, where dust covered the tables and chairs. The kitchen was dark, with pots and pans hanging silently above the stove. They could hear a faint whispering sound, like the hotel was trying to tell them something. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. The couple exchanged worried looks. "Maybe we should go back to our room," one suggested, but the other was curious. "Let's just check out the pool area," they insisted. As they headed outside, they found the pool covered in a thick layer of fog. The water was still, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. They noticed figures in the water, just beneath the surface, their faces twisted in silent screams. The couple gasped and stumbled back, realizing they weren't alone. The hotel was alive with the spirits of those who had come before them. Panicking, they raced back inside, their hearts pounding. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and the portraits now looked more sinister, their expressions twisted in agony. The couple felt as if they were being watched, and the whispers grew louder, echoing in their ears. "Stay with us, stay forever." They dashed into their room, locking the door behind them. "What is happening?" one cried, trembling. "We need to get out of here." They rushed to the window, but it wouldn't budge. The glass felt cold and unyielding, as if it had been sealed shut by the hotel's dark magic. Suddenly, the lights went out, plunging them into darkness. The couple clung to each other, their breaths quickening. They could hear footsteps outside their door, slow and deliberate. "Is someone there?" one shouted, but there was no answer. The footsteps stopped, and a chilling silence filled the room. Then a soft knock echoed through the darkness. "Let us in," a voice whispered, barely audible. "We just want to help." The couple's hearts raced. They could feel the weight of the spirits pressing in on them, urging them to join their ranks. Desperate, they searched for a way out. They remembered the ornate key they had received to check in. Maybe it unlocked something, one suggested, searching through their belongings. They found it hidden under a pile of clothes and rushed to the door, hoping it would lead them to safety. As they inserted the key into the lock, the door swung open, revealing a dimly lit hallway filled with shadows. The whispers grew louder, urging them to stay. "You can't leave," they seemed to say. "You belong here now." Ignoring the voices, the couple ran down the hall, their footsteps echoing in the silence. They passed by rooms filled with memories of laughter and joy, now turned to sorrow. Each door they passed bore the names of guests who had checked in but never checked out. They were trapped in a cycle of despair, lost souls waiting for someone to join them. Finally, they reached the staircase leading to the lobby. As they descended, the air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to reach out for them. "Don't go," a voice cried, filled with anguish. "We need you here." They burst into the lobby, but it was empty. The receptionist was gone, and the once grand space now felt like a tomb. The couple's hearts sank as they realized the truth. They had become part of the hotel's dark legacy. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The whispers turned to screams, echoing through the hallways. "You can't escape. You're one of us now." They felt the cold fingers of the spirits brushing against their skin, pulling them deeper into the hotel's grasp. In a final act of desperation, they raced toward the back of the lobby, hoping for a hidden exit. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the air was thick with despair. Just as they reached a door, they heard a voice behind them. "You can't leave." They turned to see the receptionist standing there, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You belong here. You can't escape your fate." The couple felt a wave of hopelessness wash over them as they realized the truth. They were trapped in a place where time stood still, forever lost among the souls who had come before them. As dawn approached, the hotel began to change. The shadows grew longer, and the whispers turned to cries. The couple clung to each other, terrified of what would happen when the sun rose. They knew they had to escape, but the hotel was determined to keep them. In a moment of clarity, they raced back to their room, searching for anything that could help them break free. They found an old journal left behind by a previous guest, filled with stories of those who had tried to escape. Each entry ended in despair, warning them of the hotel's power. With each passing minute, the hotel seemed to come alive, the walls pulsing with energy. The couple could feel the spirits surrounding them, their faces twisted in pain. "Stay with us," they cried, but the couple refused to give in. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the couple knew this was their last chance. They rushed to the lobby, desperately searching for a way out. The receptionist appeared again, blocking their path. "You can't leave. You are part of us now." But just as they thought all hope was lost, they spotted a small crack in the door leading to the outside. With a surge of determination, they pushed past the receptionist, feeling the cold grip of the spirits trying to pull them back. They squeezed through the crack, feeling the sunlight on their faces for the first time. As they burst into the morning light, they could hear the anguished cries of the spirits behind them. "You can't leave us," they wailed, but the couple didn't look back. They ran as fast as they could, not stopping until they reached their car parked outside. Breathless and shaken, they drove away from the hotel of lost souls, vowing never to return. But even as they left, they could still hear the whispers in the wind, calling them back to a place where the lost souls wandered forever. And though they escaped, they knew they would never truly be free. The hotel would always be there, waiting for its next guests, ready to trap them in its haunting embrace for all eternity. So, dear listener, if you ever find yourself near a grand hotel that seems too good to be true, remember the story of the couple who almost became part of its dark legacy. Stay safe and always listen to your instincts, for you never know what might be lurking in the shadows. As they drove away, the couple felt a weight lift off their shoulders. Each mile brought them further from the hotel, but the dread didn't fade. With every passing moment, an unsettling silence enveloped them, the kind that makes you want to look over your shoulder. Suddenly, the radio flickered to life, crackling with static before a voice emerged, low and chilling. "You can't escape," it whispered, sending shivers down their spines. They exchanged terrified glances. "What is happening?" one of them asked, their voice quivering. The radio continued, echoing with laughter that dripped with malice. "I told you, you belong to us," the voice taunted, filled with an agony they couldn't understand. Tension twisted in their stomachs as they sped up, desperate to put distance between themselves and the hotel. But the road ahead began to distort. the scenery warping as if the landscape was trying to pull them back. Trees reached out like skeletal fingers, their branches clawing at the sky, while shadows flitted across their peripheral vision. "Keep driving. Don't look back." With each glance in the rearview mirror, they saw shadows darting behind them. Flickering images of ghostly figures in tattered clothes, their faces twisted in anguish, all desperately reaching for the couple, mouths open in silent screams. They could feel the hotel pulling at them, trying to reclaim what it thought was rightfully its. Suddenly, the tires hit a pothole, and the car lurched violently, causing them both to gasp. As they regained control, the headlights flickered, momentarily illuminating a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and sunken, skin pale, almost translucent against the dark. She stood there, an apparition of despair, mouth twisted into a haunting smile that sent terror deep into their hearts. "Stop! We need to help her." But there was a knowing in the pit of their stomachs, telling them not to. The woman raised a hand, beckoning them closer. The air grew thick, and the atmosphere pulsed with a sinister energy. They slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the pavement, heartbeats synchronizing with the frantic rhythm of their thoughts. But logic screamed at them. A woman in danger could easily be a trap. "Don't get out," one yelled, gripping the steering wheel. But it was too late. The voice of the hotel was in their heads now. They felt compelled, as if invisible strings were pulling at their minds. "We can't just leave her," the other insisted. Against their better judgment, they opened the doors and stepped into the eerie night. The chilling wind swirled around them, carrying the stench of decay, tinging their senses with an overwhelming urge to flee. As they approached the woman, her eyes rolled back, revealing nothing but darkness, a void that threatened to swallow them whole. "Please, help me," she begged, her voice a haunting whisper that echoed through the stillness. For a moment, empathy overrode fear. But just as they reached for her, the ground beneath their feet trembled, cracking wide open, releasing a foul stench that made them gag. "Run," they shouted. They didn't stop to look back, racing towards the car with an urgency fueled by terror. But the road had transformed, unfurling like a serpent, twisting in on itself, leading them further from reality. They could hear laughter in the distance, the same twisted laughter from the hotel, echoing with delight at their misfortune. As they neared the vehicle, the hood popped open, steam billowing from the engine like the breath of some monstrous beast. The car had become an obstacle, a barrier, trapping them in this hellish nightmare. They pushed at the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if held shut by an unseen force. Heavy breathing filled the air, a sound that didn't belong to either of them. Panic surged within them. "Is someone in the car?" They peered through the windows, but the back seat glowed with an unnatural light, revealing shadows shifting within, creating a distorted image of the two of them reflected in darkened glass. The vision twisted and turned. Faces of the lost souls of the hotel staring back, their mouths moving in a ghastly harmony, whispering curses and pleas intertwined. "Let us out!" As if answering their cries, the engine roared to life, echoing through the night. The car jolted, the headlights snapping on and off erratically. The couple's fear escalated, a crescendo of terror that sent them running toward the tree line, hoping to lose themselves in the sheltering embrace of the woods. But there, the shadows deepened, thickening around them like a suffocating shroud, every rustle sending a jolt of panic shooting through their veins. Branches seemed to grasp at their clothes, clinging to them as if trying to pull them back. They stumbled on the uneven ground, the light from the car now obscured by the gathering darkness. "Where are we?" one asked, breathless, only to hear a faint whisper behind them, close enough to feel a chill run down their spines. "Stay with us. Forever." They began to run again, legs heavy with dread and fatigue, but a low, haunting melody began to bloom in the silence. It wrapped around them, sweet and sinister, luring them with a ghostly allure that made them want to stop, to listen, but their instincts screamed at them to flee. Yet the forest was not innocent. Trees shifted, Roots tangled around their ankles like grasping hands, pulling them down into the earth. Panic surged as they fought against the grasping limbs of the forest, stumbling deeper into darkness, the haunting melody growing louder, more insistent. "Make it stop!" one of them shouted, clenching their fists in desperation. But as they ran, the music changed, turning into a cacophony of anguished screams, each one like a dagger in the heart, tearing at the fabric of their sanity. The melody morphed into the echoes of those who had vanished in the hotel, pleading for peace, for release from the chains that bound them. Finally, in a moment of sheer terror, they broke free of the grasping branches. Ahead lay an ancient stone archway, a gateway leading deeper into the heart of the woods. A sense of something ancient and restless lingered there, an invitation into darkness that pulsed with an energy both alluring and repellent. "Should we go in?" One voice trembled, filled with doubt. But the other was already stepping through, the warmth of the entrance beckoning them closer, away from the haunted past. The air crackled with anticipation, the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring, and they felt the weight of countless souls pressing in around them. Every instinct screamed to run, but they were bound by threads of fate that held them in a vice-like grip, drawing them onward into the depths of the unknown. As they crossed the threshold, the ground shifted beneath them, and they were swallowed by shadows. Reality twisted again, and the couple found themselves standing in a vast, dimly lit hall, its walls lined with mirrors that reflected an endless series of themselves, each one contorted in fear. They were not alone, the whispers now swirling around them, growing louder with each passing second, pulling them into an eternal dance of despair. The mirrors flickered and shimmered, tantalizing glimpses of their past revealed. A family gathering, a joyful wedding, moments of pure happiness, now distorted into horrific parodies of what once was. Each reflection told a story of someone who had lost their way, trapped within a cycle of fear and sorrow, slowly succumbing to the hotel's insatiable hunger. The couple stumbled away from the mirrors, instinctively seeking each other's presence, hearts racing. It was too late for hesitation. The whispers became clear, each one demanding more from them, craving connection as their shadows writhed and clawed at the ground, attempting to pull them into the reflective abyss. "Join us," they urged in unison, voices a low chant that resonated through the hall, growing in intensity. "You're part of us now." A door at the far end of the hall beckoned, illuminated by a flickering light that some primal part of them recognized as hope. They sprinted towards it, hearts pounding in their chests, as the air thickened with grief. But as they approached, the door began to shift and twist, sealing itself just as they reached it, trapping them between hope and despair. One glance back revealed the mirrors crashing, sending shards spiraling through the air. Each fragment reflected a different reality, 1,000 paths leading deep into darkness. The couple held tight to each other, standing at the edge of an abyss that threatened to consume not just their lives, but their very souls. And in that moment, they realized the horrifying truth. The hotel, the spirits, the whispers, they were all part of something much larger than themselves. An ancient cycle of darkness, a hunger that could never be sated. As the shadows drew closer, they clung to each other, a final act of defiance against the consuming void. Yet in every heartbeat, they felt the call of the hotel echoing like thunder through the very fabric of their being. You can't escape, as despair threatened to drown them. They prepared for a fight, their connection fueling their determination. They would face whatever waited within that darkness, together. And as the shadows enveloped them, they took a deep breath, ready to uncover the secrets of the hotel, and perhaps to find a way to break free. But would the truth set them free, or would it bind them tighter in an impossible game of survival? One pause, one misstep, and they might find themselves wandering the same haunting halls, trapped in the cycle of the hotel's dark legacy, forever lost among the shadows. They stood close to one another, hearts pounding and breaths quickening as the shadows thickened around them. The whispers coiled tighter, transforming into desperate cries that echoed off the crumbling walls. Each voice seemed to carry a story of loss, blending into a chorus of sorrow that vibrated through the very air they breathed. In that moment, the couple felt the weight of countless souls pressing against their skin, suffocating with grief, as if the building it was alive, starving for new life. With each second ticking away, the coldness surrounded them like an ice bath, chilling them to the bone. The feeling crept into their thoughts, twisting their fears into a spiraling dread. "We have to get out of here," one whispered, desperately scanning the room, hoping for an escape. But the dim light flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to extend their fingers toward them. The very fabric of reality felt like it was fraying at the edges, unraveling into nothingness. Suddenly, a mirror on the far wall caught their eye. It shimmered with an otherworldly glow, reflecting a reality that felt distant, yet unnervingly familiar. They edged closer, drawn by the glimmer like moths to a flame. Their reflections shifted, twisting into grotesque versions of themselves. In one reflection, the man saw his face age a decade in seconds, a hollow shell of despair etched into his features. In another, the woman's eyes darkened, her lips curling into a malevolent grin that seemed to mock the very essence of her being. "Look away," he yelled, pulling her back, but it was too late. A loud crack echoed through the hall as the glass vibrated violently, shattering not into shards, but into dark clouds that seeped into the room like smoke. The air thickened, coiling around them, suffocating, as figures began to emerge from the darkness. They were shaped like the lost souls of the hotel, their forms indistinct yet painfully familiar. Each one bore a look of despair, their mouths moving, but all that escaped was a horror-stricken silence that screamed in their minds. Join us," they whispered, their voices melding into a chilling wind that rattled the windows and sent drafts of cold air swirling around the couple. The spectral figures reached out with elongated fingers, their intentions unclear, but the grotesque expressions were enough to send chills racing down their spines. They could feel the touch of icy breath against their skin, pushing them closer to the brink of madness. In a panic, they spun around, the hallway stretching endlessly before them, lined with doors they wished to explore but dared not approach. The sound of a distant laughter echoed down the hallway, sickly sweet and filled with malice, reminding them they were not alone. They could see shadows flitting beneath each door, restless, ghostly figures trapped in a torment that mirrored their own. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker sporadically, casting the hallway in a strobe-like effect. Every time the lights dimmed, the temperature dropped, revealing the outlines of figures inching closer and closer. Each time light returned, the figures appeared more twisted, more distorted, merging with the shadows lurking behind the walls. Faces they recognized, faces they didn't, each shifting like a reflection in murky water, provoking a deep sense of dread. Finally, out of desperation, they bolted down the hall, hearts racing, as they heard noises coming from behind them, scratching, thudding, an overwhelming cacophony of sound that sent adrenaline coursing through their veins. The walls seemed to pulse, bending inward as if the building itself was tightening its grip on them. Glancing back, they caught a glimpse of what they could only describe as a silhouette, a dark mass trailing behind, growing larger with every step they took. "Don't look back," he shouted, pushing forward, but curiosity clawed at their senses like knives. The instinct to know was overpowering, and for just a split second, they stole a glance over their shoulders. The creature was close, a dark shape with limbs that stretched unnaturally long, its mouth opening far wider than it should, revealing ragged teeth glistening like the shards of glass on the floor. It let out a sound that seemed to vibrate within their bones, a mix of a growl and a wail that echoed through the corridor, announcing its presence. "You can't outrun the past," it whispered, its breath hot against their necks, curling around them like smoke. They lunged for the first door they could reach, throwing it open only to confront a pitch-black void. With no time to hesitate, they plunged into the darkness, the door slamming shut behind them with a resounding finality that sent the shadows screeching in frustration. It was dark, oppressively so, and they found themselves in a room filled with whispers rising all at once, each one crashing against their resolve. "Help us! Help us!" the voices cried, their desperation a palpable force in the air. The couple fumbled through the darkness, hands brushing against something soft and wet on the ground, like a puddle of thickened sadness. It left a cold trail on their skin. Terrified, they recoiled, realizing they weren't alone in this abyss. Phantom hands reached out from the shadows, cold and clammy, pulling at their clothes, dragging them toward the ground. Panic flooded their senses, but they fought against the grasping hands with everything they had, clawing their way back into the light of the outer hallway. They stumbled into what seemed like a dimly lit bar. Abandoned glassware and tarnished silverware scattered about, the faint outline of blood-red stains haunting the floor. Resentment congealed into reality. Each breath felt like a battle, suffocated by the oppressive gloom that filled the air. As they surveyed the room, they noticed aged photographs hanging crookedly on the walls. In each picture, smiling faces stared back at them. But as they drew closer, a creeping dread washed over them. The faces in the photographs morphed, their smiles twisting into horrific, gaping mouths that seemed to scream silently for help. "I don't like this place, it's wrong," she murmured, gripping his arm tightly. Shadows flickered at the edge of their vision, whispering secrets, taunting them with the promise of revelations hidden within the depths of the hotel. A chill crept down their spines as the air grew heavy, pressing down as if trying to crush them into submission. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the tension, a door flinging open further down the bar. They turned, eyes wide with terror, to see a vortex of darkness swirling, pulling pieces of the room into a spiraling void. Ghostly figures tumbled out, caught in its relentless pull, their cries intermingling with the howl of the gathering storm. One figure lunged forward, slamming against a nearby wall as if trying to escape the wrath. "Save us!" it shouted, desperation etched in its translucent face. The words tore at the couple's hearts, and there was something familiar about it, but they couldn't place it. As the figure stretched out a hand, time seemed to fracture, the world around them distorting. The once familiar air grew thick with sorrow and despair, wrapping around them like a noose. "Don't touch it!" he yelled, but the pull of the figure's gaze was overwhelming, locking them in place. Memories flooded back, and for a brief moment, the world blurred between reality and nightmare. They both saw flashes of themselves at the hotel's entrance, laughter echoing through the halls, a faint memory of the life that once was. But it was deceptive, a mirage in a desert of despair. Just as they were about to step forward, the figure's mouth twisted into a smirk that sent icy tendrils creeping down their spines. The shadow behind it surged, consuming the figure whole before erupting back into the void, leaving remnants of darkness swirling like smoke. They turned to each other, wide-eyed and breathless, caught in a web of frantic whispers that urged them to move, to go deeper, uncover the truth behind the hotel's twisted history. But as they took a step forward, the room seemed to shift around them, walls bending and reshaping. The bar now felt like a labyrinth, twisting back into itself, mirrors reflecting not just their appearances, but the very essence of their fears. Something primal in the air warned them. They could feel the weight of malevolence pressing in, the dark entity lurking just out of sight, watching with keen interest. The moment of hesitation stretched out, and the shadows flickered around them like dancers in a grotesque performance, shaping the atmosphere into a cipher of dread and anticipation. Would they unearth the secrets of the hotel, or would they succumb, lost among its layers of sorrow, forever tormented by the fate of others? "This way," he finally shouted, pulling her toward a dimly lit doorway at the far end of the room, its outline pulsing with an ominous energy. As they rushed into the hallway beyond, reality began to fragment around them, the very essence of the hotel warping into a grotesque nightmare. The whispers grew larger, echoing the warning of every lost and tormented soul, urging them onward into whatever awaited in the depths, where darkness encroached with fearsome intent, ever closer and never satisfied. With every heartbeat, they ventured deeper, held captive by the promise of revelation and the torment that bound them to the hotel's insatiable will. The laughter from behind echoed through the hallways, a warning, an invitation that called them to confront the darkness head-on. The choice lay before them. Continue into the void, discovering secrets long buried, or collapse under the weight of terror that loomed behind. But whatever they chose, one thing was certain: they would never remain the same. The old bar door creaked ominously as they pushed through, its arthritic hinges protesting like the wails of the tormented souls. Once inside, the flickering lights barely illuminated the way, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls. It was like stepping into a tunnel of memories that had been festering for decades, each corner echoing with the weight of despair, as if the very air remembered the agony it had hosted. "Did you hear that?" She whispered, her voice barely a murmur, but it sent ripples of unease through him. Just beyond the light, he could make out shapes, fleeting outlines that seemed to disappear as soon as he turned to look. They moved in and out of the periphery of his vision like phantoms, taunting him with their presence. Was it his imagination, or were they real? A shiver slithered down his spine, intertwining with the lingering echoes of their laughter, now a haunting memory that clawed at his sanity. Suddenly, an icy draft swept through the room, extinguishing the feeble light overhead, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through her as she grasped his arm tighter, the warmth of his body now a beacon in the void. He fumbled for his phone, the blinding light a small comfort against the encroaching shadows that seemed to swirl around them, alive with malice. The glow barely illuminated the scattered bottles and shattered glass, yet the darkness beyond seemed impenetrable, a thick wall of anxiety pressing in on all sides. Every breath felt heavy with dread, as if the hotel itself was exhaling sorrow. The whispers grew louder, coiling around them like a serpent ready to strike. "Help us. Remember us," the voices echoed, blending into a dissonant chorus that rattled his bones. The phrase lingered, echoing in the empty spaces, urging them deeper into the abyss. As he shined the light around, he noticed something grotesque. On the far wall, a series of portraits adorned the peeling wallpaper. Every face was twisted in despair, eyes wide and pleading, mouths stretched into silent screams. One picture caught his attention, a woman dressed in a tattered gown, her hair flowing like a dark river, wearing a smile that felt too wide, too eager for comfort. Her gaze seemed to follow him, a look of warning mixed with dark temptation, as if she knew something essential that was lost to time. "Let's get out of here," he urged, though his voice struggled to mask the trembling beneath. But before they could reach the exit, a loud crash reverberated from behind them, sending their hearts racing. It was followed by a low growl that vibrated through the very floor they stood on, the source unseen, a shadow lurking in the depths of the dark. "Did you hear that?" she gasped again, but this time with a quiver of fear. A shuffling sound emerged, dragging footsteps that grew louder, heavier, as though something was getting closer, something that had been hidden away, now awakened and hungry. They instinctively backed toward the bar, the sense of impending doom pulling them taut. Her breath quickened, panic radiating off her as the air thickened, charged with anticipation. Without thinking, he grabbed a broken bottle, its jagged edge glinting in the faint glow of his phone, gripping it like a lifeline. The shadows cast grotesque figures on the wall, twisting in terrible shapes that seemed to pulse with every sound. A whisper brushed against his ear, cold and rancid like the breath of the grave. "Stay with us." He stumbled back, almost tripping over his own feet. The darkness felt alive, writhing like a worm, ready to swallow them whole. Then, as the whisper fell silent, the atmosphere shifted again. The lights flickered back on, revealing the bar now transformed. Bottles that previously lay scattered on the floor had righted themselves, standing silently in perfect rows, as if an unseen hand had reorganized them. An overwhelming sense of wrongness settled over them, tightening like a vice. The laughter from earlier returned, echoing through the room in a sinister harmony, an uninvited symphony of madness. "Let's go," he shouted, summoning every ounce of courage to sprint towards the exit. But as they moved, the floorboards creaked unnaturally beneath them, almost as if warning against their escape. The walls seemed to close in, the very structure of the hotel groaning in disapproval, and the shadows leaped closer, stretching toward them, the darkness itself seeking to entrap them. They finally reached the door, flinging it open with all their strength. But instead of the hallway they'd just come from, they stumbled into what appeared to be a labyrinth of mirrors, reflecting their horrified expressions endlessly. Confusion swirled as the walls shimmered with a sheen that distorted their movements. Each turn brought them face to face with twisted versions of themselves, smiling specters, eyes gleaming with malice. Their reflections were mocking, whispering secrets that swirled around them, pulling them deeper into the maze. "Where are we?" she gasped, her breath hitching as a cool breeze swept through the mirrored passages, carrying with it a hint of something sweet yet rotten. A scent was reminiscent of decay, tantalizing them to take another step forward. In every direction, the mirrors warped their realities, blurring time and space into a nightmarish blend. He heard laughter again, closer now, the sound tinged with a sinister thrill. Suddenly, one of the reflections stepped forward, breaking the glassy surface like a liquid. It was a dark figure, angular and elongated, its grin stretching impossibly wide. The laughter erupted from the reflection, reverberating through the maze, and he could taste the despair shimmering in the air, a sickly sweetness. Before he could react, the figure lunged at them with blinding speed, shattering the illusion of safety behind the glass. "Run!" he screamed, adrenaline surging. They turned and dashed through the twisting corridors, the sound of shattering glass echoing behind them like an avalanche, compelling them to push harder, faster. Each mirror flickered as they passed, distorting reality further, feeding on their fear, creating a landscape of an ever-changing nightmare. The shadows seemed to stretch out toward them, fingers of darkness grasping at their heels, as the taunts from the figures echoed louder, merging with the sounds of sinister laughter. "You belong here. Come back." They navigated the kaleidoscope of reflections, momentarily losing each other in the mirrored madness. He could barely keep track of which way was up as the floor shifted and the walls shimmered, every corner a potential dead end. Finally, they broke free from the maze, bursting into a vast room lined with ornate pillars. Yet it felt wrong. The air pulsed with dread, and every flicker of light felt like a heartbeat. Above them loomed an enormous chandelier, its glass prisms swirling with something dark, something alive. With each passing moment, the haunting essence of the hotel wrapped tighter around them, a suffocating embrace that felt like clutching hands of the dead. In the center of the room, an altar rose, draped with cobwebs and fragments of something glimmering. A diary, its pages aged and yellowed, open as though waiting for them. Curious yet terrified, she stepped closer, entranced by the whispers emanating from the pages, beckoning her to unveil the secrets trapped within. "It's calling to us," she said, barely turning her gaze from the altar, entranced by an unseen force. The shadows shifted again, a creeping darkness that rolled like smoke toward the altar, licking at the edges, waiting hungrily for her to reach out. "No, don't touch it," he shouted, sensing the danger pulsing through the air. But it was too late. Her fingers brushed the pages, and in that moment, the world shattered around them. A blinding flash engulfed the room, and the air thickened like molasses. As the light faded, they found themselves breathless, surrounded by swirling shadows that coalesced into the shapes of anguished faces, their silent cries piercing them to the core. "Join us, remember us," they murmured, their spectral forms weaving in and out of existence. The hotel was a reflection of every lost soul, every unfulfilled life entwined with their own, and the truth hit hard. Their fate lay intertwined with these tortured spirits, forever bound to the legacy of the hotel. Fear mingled with a strange sense of belonging, and he realized that he knew the invitation all too well. It was a chance, an inexorable pull into something deeply familiar, twisted and comforting, calling them to relent and accept the darkness that offered a sense of belonging they desperately craved. But the price would be steep, and terror clawed at his mind, a reminder of the fate that awaited if they dared entertain such dark promises. In that split second, the truth hung heavy in the air, and they faced the choice: embrace the shadows and the horrors it brought, or fight against the inevitable pull of the hotel's curse, struggling to break free from its tightening grip. The air crackled with tension, the decision dangling precariously before them, both alluring and terrifying, as the figures surrounding them extended long-fingered hands, inching closer in their silent plea. And as the spirits wailed their silent lament, the walls began to shift around them once more, ushering in a deeper darkness with each passing second. Would they succumb to the haunting sorrow of those who came before, or could they find a way to escape the legacy of despair that threatened to ensnare them? Whatever lay ahead, there could be no turning back now. Suddenly, the room flickered again, the chandeliers swaying above them as if caught in a ghostly breeze. The air grew colder, each breath a visible puff in the dim light, and the shadows began to swirl. More wildly, from the edges of the room, faint, disembodied whispers filled the space, layering over one another until their words became a jumbled tapestry of fear. "Stay, stay with us," the chorus beckoned, each echo a tantalizing thread weaving through the thickening air, binding their fates to a place that thrived on despair. The altar pulsed with an eerie energy, and the diary, its cover worn and cracked, seemed to breathe, drawing her closer. The pages fluttered before her, though no wind stirred. He could feel the weight of her curiosity clawing at him, a visceral need to understand the voices, the sorrow, the promise. A sudden chill wrapped around him, and he sensed that something beneath the altar hungered for release, a foul presence that shifted just out of sight. The moment she leaned over the diary, a cacophony erupted. Piercing shrieks melded with laughter, a sound that rang out like shattering glass. The spectral figures surrounding them solidified briefly, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of anguish. The flickering lights turned into an erratic strobe, and in that dizzying moment, she glimpsed tortured figures trapped within the walls, their twisted forms reaching out, mouths stretched wide in silent screams. "Get away from there," he barked, grabbing her by the arm, yanking her back as a devastating roar filled the space. The shadows surged forward like a storm, slashing at them with the ferocity of 1,000 angry spirits. Centuries of despair converged in that hallway, and he felt the walls tighten, as if the hotel itself sought to compress them into the folds of its malevolence. His heart raced as they stumbled back, the sense of urgency stark against the horror unfolding around them. The shadows writhed and contorted, forming eerie shapes that mimicked their every movement. In the chaos, he glanced back at the altar. It now pulsed with a warm glow, compelling and inviting, the secrets it held whispering directly to their fears and regrets. Time felt like it was unraveling around them. He could sense the hotel's soul wishing to envelop them, a flicker of temptation that beckoned him to surrender, to find solace in the darkness that had already claimed so many lost souls. "What's happening?" she shouted, panic rising in her voice. Through the tumult, he could see glimmers of hope in her eyes. They were fighting the same battle against despair, yet every flicker of her resolve drew the shadows closer, their forms growing larger, more defined against the silver light spilling from the diary. Each of the figures began to chant, their cacophony rising in overwhelming volume, words twisting and warping in his ears, shades of long-forgotten memories brushing past. "Never forget us! Join us!" The persistent murmurs surged with more fervor, seeping into his mind, entwining his thoughts with unthinkable dread. The walls began to pulse, the stones vibrating as a deep growl reverberated from the very foundation of the hotel. It was a sound like thunder trapped in a crypt, endless and terrible. The flickering lights now cast shadows that took form and shape. Figures from another time, lost souls cursed to roam the very halls that once welcomed them. Before he could call out again, the diary trembled, and with a sudden, violent jerk, it flew open. From the pages burst a blinding light, illuminating everything in radiant white that morphed into a kaleidoscope of color. Red, black, blue. A swirling storm of spectral images and memories that danced and twirled chaotically around them. He felt disoriented, enveloped by the eerie beauty, but dread loomed, gnawing at him like a ravenous beast. Out of the chaos, a figure emerged, a woman draped in draping fabrics, her face obscured by shadows. She glided forward, each step deliberate as the other spirits surged with her. He could sense her authority. Even the shadows recoiled slightly, forming a barrier behind her as she raised a hand, the whispers falling abruptly silent. The moment felt heavy, like the calm before a storm, both terrifying and mesmerizing. "You cannot change your fate," she spoke softly, yet her voice echoed through the vastness of the chamber, chilling them to their core. "You've been called to remember, and thus you shall be bound." As she approached, the ambient light shifted again, revealing the desperate faces of those trapped behind the walls. A sea of tortured souls, swirling in an echoing wail that surged with the emotional weight of hopelessness. He felt the urge to flee, but movement froze in him. The weight of despair was crushing, and the woman's presence felt almost maternal, yet twisted. A knot of sorrow contracted in his chest, pushing him deeper into a pit of anguish. Standing still felt wrong, yet every instinct screamed for him to keep running. Suddenly, the shadows surged, forming tendrils that reached out for them, wrapping around his legs like cold iron chains, pulling him down toward the ground. Desperately, he tugged at her with his free arm, but she was as immobile as a statue, transfixed by the figure before them. "We can't stay. We need to leave," he shouted, but his voice felt swallowed in the oppressive air. The woman lifted her head slightly, and for a moment, he caught a glimpse of her eyes, dark voids that filled him with an unspeakable dread. "You belong to this place now," she said, a mirthless smile stretching across her lips. "Lose yourself within its beauty, within its sorrow." Her voice turned into a haunting melody that wrapped around them like ivy, making it harder to breathe, burying them deeper in the hotel's embrace. As her words soaked into his mind, the room around them began to blur, melting into darkness before solidifying again, yet presenting a different scene. Dining tables laden with sumptuous feasts, laughter and chatter filtering through the air, a masquerade ball in full swing. Dressed in elegant attire, the guests twirled and danced without noticing the two intruders, oblivious to their plight, the illuminated ballroom shimmering with an otherworldly allure. Panic surged again as he realized they were in danger of succumbing to the false beauty of the hotel's lure. He yanked harder on her arm, desperate. "Fight it! We have to fight it!" But as he shouted those words, the music softened, and the dancers turned to gaze at them with hollow smiles, faces painted with mockery and longing, eyes shining with an unsettling familiarity. The music swelled once more, wrapping around them, its cadence hypnotic, urging him to let go, to join them in a wretched dance of despair. She finally broke his hold, stepping forward as if entranced, nearly lost in the shimmering chaos of the ball. A silky laughter rippled from the figures around them, flowing like a dark river. "Join us. It's so much easier," they sang, a chorus filled with sorrowful ecstasy. The opulence beckoned to her, its brightness offering false warmth against the cold of the reality they had just escaped. "No, stay with me," he cried out as the walls of reality shifted again, altering the dance of shadows that flowed like an endless tide around them. He could feel them slipping away, strands of hope unraveling like a frayed rope, and panic turned fierce inside him. The hotel wished to consume her, to bind her to the tormented souls forever, a sacrifice in exchange for the madness that fed on despair. Gripping the broken bottle tightly, he plunged forward, plunging into the throng of dancers like a storm cutting through placid water, the glass glinting ominously in the chaos. His voice grew raw, strained, but he reached out, desperate to touch her arm again, to pull her back before she disappeared into the swirling darkness that gripped the ballroom with its enticing pull. "You don't want this. Remember who you are." A spark of clarity danced in the recesses of his memory, a flash of light piercing the growing shadow over her mind. But the moment hung heavy, and for a second that seemed to stretch into eternity, she hesitated, caught in the web of seduction woven by the hotel. Laughter echoed like shattered porcelain, and around them began to darken, shadows creeping in closer as the dancers shifted and twisted, their forms becoming more ominous, cloaked in despair. "Join us, embrace the darkness." The invitation whispered through the tempest of sound, seeping into the very foundation of who they were. The hotel's grip was unyielding, each beat of her heart a reminder of the allure, the sweet promise of belonging, of escaping the burdens they both carried. He felt the weight of hopelessness crash against him, dark waters threatening to pull him under, but he fought back, resolute, gathering every ounce of strength left within him. He reached out again, eyes locked onto hers, holding onto the flicker of light that still glimmered through the veil of despair. "Remember us," he urged, the urgency flooding his voice. The dancers whirled faster, the shadows swirling into a tempest, threatening to tear them apart. Fear swallowed him whole, but within that fear, the determination burned fiercely. Together, they could resist the call of despair. It was a race against the vanishing light, a desperate battle to reclaim the parts of themselves that the hotel sought to devour. The veil of shadows thinned briefly, the laughter fading into a low hum like the distant murmur of a crashing sea. He tore through the blurred lines of the ballroom, breaking through the spell like shattering glass, reaching for her as the darkness began to swallow the illusion whole. "Fight it! You are not alone." He could feel her wavering, the darkness battling against the tether of their shared memories. And in that moment, as hope flickered bright between them, the hotel unleashed a shriek that rattled the very stones of its foundation, singularly focused on tearing them apart, drowning them in its unspeakable anguish. Around them, the shadows twisted and roared, revealing jagged forms and twisted faces, echoes of those who had fallen before, each one a grim testament to the hotel's insatiable hunger. The air grew thick as if the very atmosphere was infused with despair's lethal grip, and for every step he took toward her, the shadows clawed back, grasping for him, brushing against his skin like icy fingers, coaxing him to relent. Now, with the barrier between them almost gone, he could see her struggling, her face a mask of fear and determination, wavering against the call of the dance. "Help me," she shouted, her voice barely rising above the approaching malaise. The hotel beckoned, promising eternal bliss within its depths, but he could hear the truth hidden behind that promise, an endless cycle of sorrow and regret, feeding on the living. "I will not let go," he vowed, adrenaline surging, and he lunged, grabbing her wrist, pulling her back with all his might. The darkness lurched in response as the ballroom twisted into chaos again, but he drew strength from her cries. Their fingers entwined, and in that moment, a fleeting bond flickered bright through the encroaching shadows, illuminating the way forward. "We fight together," he shouted, and the declaration rang out like a defiant bell, slicing through the swirling despair. The ballroom rippled, the specters recoiling momentarily, their disdain twisting the forms of their faces, anger bubbling within the air thick with anguish. In that instant, the warm glow from the diary surged again, illuminating the countless faces hidden in the dark, each one a reflection of restitution and regret. The beauty of the hotel turned grotesque. Despair erupted into raw emotion, illuminating the path before them. Shadows howled as they coiled closer, eager to reclaim their prize, sick with rage that their grasp was slipping away. Digging in deep, he and she stepped forward together, entwined in a dance of defiance, navigating through the darkness. With each step, light burst forth, forming cracks through the creeping shadows, illuminating the truth of their strength, the warmth of their connection as they fought tooth and nail against the hotel's unyielding grasp. And so they ran, shadows clawing at their heels. But they pressed on, hearts pounding, weaving through the pulsating fabric of despair, desperate to find an exit, some way to break the cycle of sorrow that ensnared them like a gnashing beast. But deeper still, the hotel's heart lay, whispering its bitter promises as it churned with violent intent, and every step became a countdown to the moment when the walls would close in again, collapsing around them in a beautiful, yet terrifying crescendo of despair. It wasn't just a fight for freedom, it was a battle for their very souls, and in the end, but deeper still, the hotel's heart lay, whispering its bitter promises as it churned with violent intent. Every heartbeat echoed louder in his ears. Shadows stretched like dark fingers towards them, reaching and clawing, trying to pull them back into the depths of despair. Desperation edged closer to panic as he felt the pull of the swirling void. "Keep going," he urged, his voice breaking with the weight of their struggle. They ran through a twisting corridor, walls lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow them, filled with quiet malice. Each step made the floor creak, as if the house itself were alive and protesting their escape. The flickering lights above them dimmed, plunging the passage into darkness for a moment. When they blinked through the shadows, the faces in the paintings had transformed, their mouths twisted into sinister grins as if they relished in their torment. The glimmer of a light caught his eye in the distance, a pulsating glow that beckoned them forward. Hope surged within him, pushing him to squeeze her hand tighter as they navigated through the chaos. But the moment he thought they were nearing freedom, the walls around them began to close in. They shifted and slumped, creaking under the strain, as if the entire structure was adjusting to confine them once and for all. "This way," he shouted, veering sharply to the left. They stumbled into a room that looked like a dining hall frozen in time. A long table set with exquisite dishes and silverware that gleamed under the wavering candlelight. Yet, the food sat untouched, rotting away despite the cheerful presentation, and a sickly sweet smell wafted through the air, clinging to their lungs. Gusts of wind rattled the window panes, slamming shut as if to trap them inside. He swore he could hear whispers soft and sinister, curling through the air like smoke. "Stay with us. Enjoy the feast." Chills danced along his spine. A line of spectral figures sat around the table, their skin an unnatural shade of gray, eyes hollow and devoid of life. They stared with malicious glee, their mouths stretching into wide smiles that revealed rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Mouths that never moved, yet echoed an invitation more haunting than any verbal plea. Fighting against the urge to succumb to the grotesque allure, he turned to the woman only to find her staring blankly at the phantoms. "No, they'll trap you." He pulled her back, but a force beyond his comprehension surged from the room, trying to drag her into the depths of its eerie charm. "Remember who you are," he screamed, desperation coating each word. She blinked, a flicker of recognition dancing in her dark eyes before the shadows grasped for her again. The ghostly figures leaned forward, their bony fingers mimicking the motion of feasting, as if consuming her soul instead of the decaying banquet laid out before them. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread swell within him. "We have to leave." Together, they retreated into the hallway, but this time, the corridor twisted into a labyrinth, forging new pathways that had not been there before. An unseen hand seemed to guide them deeper into the heart of the hotel. Every step felt more like a surrender than a fight. The walls pulsed like a heartbeat, throbbing in time with a cacophony of whispers that spilled like dark rain into their ears, fragmenting thoughts and gnawing at their resolve. Suddenly, they stumbled upon an old library, shelves lined with dust-covered tomes. Every book seemed to breathe, as if waiting for them to disturb the fragile truce of silence. The smell of mildew overwhelmed him, thick and cloying. As he stepped forward, a shrill laughter erupted from the shadows, echoing like shattering glass. Dust motes danced wildly in the fading light, and for a fleeting instant, it seemed as if figures from the pages began to emerge, writhing against the confines of paper. They live only to tell their stories, she whispered, her voice trembling. Tension soared as shadows flickered along the walls, warping into faces twisted with agony and despair. He grabbed her hand tighter, but a sudden chill swept through the air, creeping up his spine, igniting every nerve in his body. Glancing back, he saw silhouettes forming behind them, obscured by the dim light, yet undeniably looming. The library's hundreds of eyes became countless pairs of hungry glances, watching, waiting, eager to absorb their fear. "We can't give in," he breathed, steeling himself against the tide of dread that pressed in around them. But no sooner had he made this choice than the door slammed shut, echoing like a thunderclap through the room. The laughter escalated into a cacophony of derision, and he felt the weight of despair pull at their ankles, dragging them downward into the depths of their own terror. Books flew from the shelves, pages flapping wildly like tormented wings, each one a scream begging to be heard, fading into nothingness. The ground quaked beneath them, old wood splintering as black tendrils erupted from the floor, slithering toward them with the impatience of a predator stalking its prey. In a panic, he yanked her toward the window, where the glass shimmered like liquid despair. "We have to escape." But as they approached, they saw their reflections staring back, distorted and twisted, grotesque versions of themselves trapped behind the veil of reality. Their hearts raced in sync as he crashed against the window, flourishing his wrist in a failed attempt to break through. "Break the glass! We need to get out!" he yelled, the pounding of his heart drumming in his ears. Yet every swing felt like hitting a wall of ice, cold and impenetrable. He turned back just in time to catch her gaze, filled with confusion and a hint of surrender, shadows creeping at her heels. A thunderous roar erupted from the depths of the library, shaking the very foundations of the room. Books began to tumble one by one, piling around them like a monstrous avalanche of forgotten memories, weaving tales of despair and loss. "No, please," he gasped. "Not like this." The shadows surged forward, weaving through the piles of fallen tomes, climbing toward the two of them as laughter morphed into wails of anguish. He could feel their chilling breath wrap around him, chilling him to the bone, suffocating him. The retreating figures from the shelves now lunged for them, hands grasping, mouths gaping, whispering curses and threats that dripped with malice. "You'll never escape," they cried, a mass of voices wrapping around them like chains forging the grip of the past. "You are trapped here, forever." He felt the cracks of sanity splintering, the walls around them bending reality until it all seemed fluid like a nightmarish dream. Every glance revealed grotesque laughter, as if the very fabric of the hotel gorged itself on fear. With a fierce determination coursing through him, he clutched her hand, looking past the chaos and torment. "Together, remember," he reminded her, forcing the warmth of shared memories into their grasp, refusing to let the shadows siphon away their resolve. Turning back to the hulking mass of darkness, he steadied himself. "We will write our own ending." The shadows recoiled, and for a moment, he thought it might work. But then a piercing shriek erupted, ripping through the air like glass shattering. The tendrils surged forward, and the library began to distort, warping as sacred tomes and dreadful spells merged into one, twisting into nightmarish forms that reached for their very souls. The walls tightened ominously, no escape, no refuge. Gritting his teeth against the rising tide of fear, he kicked a book away, its cover bursting open like a clotted wound, pages whispering secrets of those who had walked before them, people who chose to stay and never leave. The image of their hollow faces flashed before him, a warning, a reminder of a fate he refused to accept. "I won't become part of you," he cried into the growing whirlwind of despair. But the shadows pushed, forcing him backward, drawing them into their unforgiving embrace, deeper into the hotel's heart. The room began to spiral, the walls bleeding darkness as he propelled them toward the window again, where reality waited just beyond the shimmering pain. "We'll break through, we have to." But as he lunged forward, The figures from the shadows converged, clutching at them with desperation, their whispers growing frantic. Stay with us, belong to us, the invitation smothering, relentless. The window warped, light bending and twisting as if time itself held its breath, weaving a spell that would trap them forever in the hotel's mournful tapestry. His heart thundered, pounding against the heaviness of impending doom. The air stilled around them for a brief moment before the storm erupted. Darkness roared, an instinct kicked in. He grasped her shoulder with intent, pulling her against him. Now! And as their bodies hit the glass, the world exploded into shards of brilliance and agony, spiraling into blinding light mingled with the deepest shadows. In a moment frozen in time, they felt the entity of the hotel shatter, allowing them to drift through, closer to the edge of oblivion and freedom. Yet, even as they surged toward the exhilarating promise of escape, he felt the grasp of despair latching onto his ankle, dragging him back into the suffocating embrace of the darkness they had fought so hard to escape. As he felt the grip of despair tightening like a noose around his ankle, a flicker of adrenaline surged through him. With one last desperate push, he threw his weight against the glass, but it held firm, its surface thrumming wildly, a barrier forged by anguish and despair. The shadows twisted and writhed, pulling him into a vortex of dark whispers that flattened his spine and clawed at his mind. "Don't let go," he screamed, turning to her through the chaos. Yet, the shadows wrapped around her too, their grip sinuous and cruel. She inverted into a visage of horror, skin pale and eyes dulled, as if life had drained from her essence. "Join us," the shadows sang, a chorus of broken promises, and past sins echoing around them like a sinister lullaby. With terror pooling in his gut, he grasped her hand with an intensity that grounded him. But the phantom surrounding her seemed to pulse like a living entity, bending toward him with a malicious hunger. The air grew thick, chilling his breath, and he could feel the presence of all those who had vanished within these walls pressing against him, clawing to be heard. Their faces morphed out from the edges of shadows, mouths forming howls of despair that echoed his thoughts. "You cannot resist." He forced himself to pull back, tightening his grip on her wrist. "Remember our moments, remember who you are," he whispered urgently, trying to infuse every word with the warmth of their shared past. But memories slipped through her mind like sand through fingers, her expression flickering between hope and despair. The shadows tightened their grip, unwilling to relinquish their hold, suffocating them with the weight of countless tragedies. The library warped even more around them, growing grotesque in its malevolence. The shelves seemed to stretch into the void, their once pristine wood now gnarled and twisted like the fingers of the damned, reaching hungrily for the two of them. He thought he saw figures lurking in the corners, faceless specters, their bodies indistinguishable from the cluttered shadows. The sound of rustling pages became a frantic cacophony, books slamming shut, ragged breathing echoing, as if the library itself were alive, feeding off their fear. Suddenly, the floor trembled, and with a bone-rattling roar, a gaping maw opened beneath them. "Down!" he cried, pulling her back from the brink of oblivion. But the ground cracked like fragile glass, splintering underfoot and revealing a darkness that pulsed like a beating heart, a void that promised nothing but despair and eternal suffering. He barely managed to steady himself, his legs shaking from the very real threat of falling into that malevolent abyss. And then he saw it, heard it, the sound of laughter circling around them, chilling and sharp. It rang through the air with an insidious echo, mocking their struggle, feeding off their desperation like a ravenous beast. "You will join us. You will be ours," the laughter bellowed, reverberating through the very marrow of his bones. The shadows around him convulsed wildly, surging as if anticipating their next move, eager to ensnare their prey. The air exploded with flickering lights, ghostly apparitions moving through the space like fireflies of torment, illuminating the anguish etched onto their faces. Each figure bore the marks of those who came before, eyes hollow, strands of darkness trailing behind them like smoke. He recognized despair he had felt in fleeting moments, crystallized in the faces before him, condemned to this place. A reminder that escaping wasn't merely an act of will, but a battle against an ancient evil that sought to devour their very essence. In that chilling second of realization, he sensed the walls closing in, embracing him in a way that suggested they were alive, like a predator converging on its prey. The air shifted and thickened, making it harder to breathe as the laughter morphed into anguished screams, echoing their shared desperation. "We will drag you under." A cacophony of wails merged into one, swirling around them, and he felt the tempests of their collective despair intensifying, a maelstrom of sorrow and dread that clung to him, seeking entry into his heart. Panic surged through him, igniting his senses. He threw his weight against her, urging her toward a side passage that beckoned with a sliver of light. "This way. We have to move now," he shouted, though doubt gnawed at him with every step forward. Shadows writhed from every corner, hinting at monstrous forms hidden just out of sight, waiting for them to stumble. As they raced toward the light, it flickered, illuminating brief glimpses of a nightmarish reality. Then, they dashed past a flickering doorway, half open, revealing a chamber brimming with mirrors. Each crystal surface glimmered with a malevolence that made his skin crawl. He caught sight of their reflections, warped and terrifying. They didn't bear their own faces, but those of fugitive souls entrapped centuries before. The figures moved against the glass, their hands pressed close as if seeking escape, whispering their warnings in a chorus of dread. "Turn back. Don't enter. It's a trap." But the shadows beyond pressed them forward, the dark tendrils snaking closer, elongating with sinister intent. They plunged through the doorway, their features merging and stretching grotesquely in all directions. Gazing into the mirrors, he saw nightmares unfolding behind him, rippling like an oncoming storm. The shadows took form, twisted shapes with hollow eyes and gaping mouths that screamed without sound, a dark symphony of their worst fears materializing in the reflective glass. "Stay together," he urged, yanking her toward him as the reflections moved independently, whispering treacherous secrets about their past. "You're nothing. You're lost. Just give in." Each word dripped with venom, penetrating their resolve. They were losing their grip, the layers of reality wrapping tighter around them, and he could see her wavering as the shadows whispered their dark promises of eternal rest. Suddenly, an enormous mirror at the far end of the chamber began to swirl like a storm, its surface rising and falling, distorting their reflections into grotesque forms of despair. "We have to break that one," he shouted, desperation igniting his every nerve. Rushing toward it, shadows clawed at their heels, a dark tide of malevolence surging forward, threatening to drown them in its depths. With all his strength, he hurled himself at the mirror. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, thousands of shards cascading like falling stars, each fragment echoing a cry of liberation. For a brief moment, the shadows recoiled, howling with rage as the scent of freedom filled the air. Their laughter turned to shrieks, and as he reached for her once more, he felt a jolt, a surge of clarity flooding back into her eyes as if the bond between them had fought against the tide of darkness. "We can escape," she gasped, desperation mingling with newfound determination. They raced past the snaking shadows, dodging the grasping tendrils as he urged her forward, their path opening briefly into a dim light that flickered like a candle in the dark. "Keep running." But as they neared the light, the entire hotel shook violently, a furious roar echoing from within, as though the very structure were erasing its past. "You can't leave," the shadows shrieked, layers of darkness swirling like a tempest around them as they fought against the encroaching blackness. The walls cracked and groaned, and for a heart-stopping moment, it felt like they were being swallowed whole, pulled back into the vacuum of despair. But their resolve remained, and in that moment of sheer will, they pushed through the last barrier, emerging into a shadowy corridor that emanated a pulsing energy, laced with the remnants of anguish. The light flickered ahead, consistently drawing them closer. An open door leading toward salvation and freedom. But the shadows were relentless, closing in, claws grasping at their heels. And in a frantic burst of energy, he pulled her through, propelling them into the illuminating glow of an exit. Just as they crossed the threshold, a shrill wail erupted from the shadows, and a violent gust slammed the door shut behind them, sealing the torment back. Within its confines, they stumbled into an expansive hall, its majestic beauty starkly contrasting the horrors they'd left behind. Yet even in this seemingly tranquil space, a chill lingered in the air, wrapping around them like a haunting embrace, subtle yet oppressive. They turned to catch their breath, the sound of their hearts thumping in their ears, almost drowning out the whispers still resonating in the back of their minds, echoing like a fading curse. The taste of freedom hinted at salvation, but shadows lurked at the edges of their vision, offering fleeting glimpses of the hotel's sinister embrace. "We must go. It's not over." He felt it then, the palpable sense of dread clinging to the back of his throat. And even as they took hesitant steps into the hall, the atmosphere shifted, a malevolent specter trailing behind them, tightening its grip. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath their feet, each sound echoing ominously as the air thickened with malevolence. The walls loomed with dark shadows, watching them, waiting, anticipating their next move. "Keep moving," he urged, feeling the weight of their shared fear urging them onward, stepping deeper into the maze of a reality that threatened to ensnare them once more, its twisted roots growing stronger with each passing moment. And then it came, a low whisper drifting through the air, curling around their consciousness like a tendril of smoke. "You'll never escape." The whisper slithered through the air, wrapping around them like a serpent coiling tightly, squeezing out any remnants of hope. He shivered, feeling the chill seep into his bones. Shadows flickered just beyond their vision, elongating and twisting in unnatural shapes, as if alive and hungry. He turned sharply, his heart racing wildly. The walls seemed to close in, draped in oppressive gloom where once there was vibrancy. Old portraits stared down at them, eyes following their every move, mouths twisted into mocking smiles that hinted at secrets long buried. They were not just depictions of the past, but vessels for the pain and agony that had transpired in this very place. Echoes of laughter now turned to silent screams. The heavy air thickened as he caught glimpses of spectral figures hovering near the edges of the dim light. "We have to find a way out," he urged, grasping her hand tightly. But as they moved forward, the very floor beneath them began to shift, pulsing like a living organism, each beat corresponding with a chorus of whispers that rose in volume. It became a cacophony, drowning out their thoughts, each voice pressing against their minds, taunting them, whispering words of failure and regret. Shadows began to stretch and ripple across the floor, forming grotesque shapes that slithered closer, dragging themselves with a sickening slowness. He could see claws emerging, sharp and glistening, ready to claw at their very essence. The cool air thickened with a heady mix of dread and long-forgotten misery, as if the building itself was exhaling a breath steeped in torment. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the hall, distorting their sense of direction. The doors that lined the corridor began to rattle, a low and ominous vibration that sent panic coursing through them. He caught her eye and they pressed on faster, but with every step, the atmosphere grew heavier, pressing down like an unbearable weight. With each hurried footfall, the shadows crept closer, whispering sweet nothings of despair that clawed at their minds, seeking to draw them back into the depths. "Not this way," she murmured, her eyes darting toward the flickering candlelight spilling into the corridor from an adjacent room. There was something captivating about it, something that felt almost like warmth, a deceptive promise of safety amidst the chill. They moved toward the light, the flickers growing brighter, only to dim instantly as if the room were exhaling. When they entered, the scene before them was surreal. A grand dining table, lavishly set for a feast that would never occur, stood in eerie contradiction to the dust motes dancing in the thin beams of light. Silverware glistened with an unnatural polish. Plates were filled with rotting food, yet the air held the unmistakable scent of decay. It was a mockery of celebration, a sinister invitation to join those long gone. A feast frozen in time, yet the essence of sorrow permeated the air. As they approached the table, he could hear low murmurs, like the leftovers of a conversation that had long ended, tinged with desperation and longing. A great chandelier loomed overhead, its crystals sparkling with trapped light. But in its reflection, distorted faces could be seen grimacing in agony. The clinking sound of imaginary glasses raised in silent toasts echoed around them, each clang a reminder that happiness was just an illusion within these cursed walls. Then a cold breeze swept through the room, snuffing the candles one by one, until they were engulfed in darkness. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them, forming sentences laced with anguish, as if the very air were writhing to communicate their despair. "Join us, be one with us. You'll never leave." Suddenly, the table shuddered, silverware clattering violently, as if struck by unseen hands. The plates began to tilt, food rolling toward them, dismembered fingers slathered in a morbid sauce, pale remnants of once living souls. Heavy footsteps echoed from behind them, relentless and slow, pounding against the floor with an intent that sent chills through their spines. They turned, eyes wide with terror, just in time to see a silhouette emerge from the darkness. A figure with elongated features and glinting eyes, hollow sockets peering into their very souls. The entity twisted unnaturally, limbs bending in ways that should not have been possible, its mouth opening wide to reveal a gaping void that seemed to hum with a deep, resonant horror. "You can't escape what's been offered," it boomed, the voice reverberating through their bodies like thunder, shaking the very foundation of their being. The shadows around them seethed and writhed, filling the air with a venomous energy that threatened to pull them into its depths. Panicking, he grabbed her arm and began to retreat, back toward the entrance they had come from. But the darkness shifted like a living thing, closing in on all sides as the entity stepped closer, the air crackling with the promise of despair. "Stay," it hissed, eyes narrowing as it gestured with a skeletal hand, beckoning them with an eerie authority. Outside the room's walls, the whispers crescendoed, clawing at their minds with an insistence that urged them to give in, to surrender to the lure of the shadows. As they backed away, the memories of those who had come before them surged back, swirling in the depths of their minds. Voices filled with regret and longing echoed, weaving a tapestry of despair that enveloped them. Just when he thought they could go no further, she suddenly froze, her gaze locked on an old, tarnished mirror hanging crookedly on the wall, its surface rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. "Look," she said breathlessly, pointing. In the glass, they could see behind them, figures emerging from the shadows, each face twisted into a grimace of torment, mouths opening in silent shrieks. Strands of shadow reached for them through their own reflection, and he grabbed her, pulling her back, as if the glass itself could reach out to ensnare them. Cacophony erupted as the mirrors shattered violently, shards spraying across the room like deadly rain. In the chaos he felt, the ground shake beneath them, tables began to topple, and the air buzzed with an electric pain, a manifestation of all those who had been trapped, desperate to escape. They fought against the chaos, adrenaline surging through them, as the darkness pressed closer, flooding the room with an insatiable hunger. "No more," he shouted, his voice raw with fear. He pushed forward, propelling her toward the door, although the shadows surged back to claim them, hissing louder, the promise of oblivion filling the air with chilling allure. A dark wave of despair surged forward, crashing against them like a tidal wave as he realized they had to confront whatever cursed them, whatever had taken hold of this place, if they had any hope of escaping. Summoning what strength he had left, he turned to face the shadowy entity, heart pounding as it loomed before them, waiting, watching. "We will break this curse," he shouted defiantly, raising his voice against the oppressive darkness that sought to pull them under. The shadows hesitated, flickering and pulsing, as if recognizing the resolve within him. A flicker of defiance flickered amidst the overwhelming gloom. With that, he reached for the remnants of their shattered hopes, their intertwined futures, and among the carnage of the past, he saw something glimmering in the disarray, a fractured piece of the mirror, reflecting the dim glow of their resolve. "Together!" he shouted, brandishing it like a shield, feeling a surge of power emanate from their shared determination. The figure recoiled momentarily, but he pushed forward, pressing the shard into the dark space, urging the light to break through the void, fighting against the encroaching shadows that screamed and writhed. The noise intensified once more, a chorus of anguished voices wailing in protest as the beam of light burst forth, illuminating the chamber with a radiant glow. The shadows screamed in unwelcome agony, dissolving into wisps as he felt the very fabric of the room begin to shift, warping under the radiant light. They stood together, heart racing, knowing this was their moment, their chance to break free as the entity howled in fury, darkness splintering in the wake of their defiance. "We have to go now," he urged, pulling her along as they raced back through the light. The energy of their shared memories ignited something deep within, propelling them past the collapsing shadow realm. Memories of laughter, love, and promise guiding them home. As the darkness began to consume itself, images of the past were veiled in a wash of light, memories flickering and merging until they barely resembled the pain that had once driven them apart. Just within sight of the door, another figure appeared, trapped in shadows. "No," they called out, reaching toward them, a desperate look etched across a familiar face. It was someone they knew, someone they had lost to this place, their eyes wide with fear and despair. Time slowed to a crawl as that haunting gaze charged forward, holding them for an agonizing second. He felt her tremble, pulling back slightly, but summoning the strength left within his grasp, he shook his head resolutely. "We can't save them unless we save ourselves," he yelled above the din, a fierce determination igniting within. The figure began to fade back into the shadows, eyes pleading, but the darkness was insatiable, eager to reclaim those trapped within its grasp. As they hurtled toward the exit, the shadows grasped at their heels, the whispers growing louder again. But they were moving now. Escape was just within reach. In a final rush of adrenaline, hand in hand, they burst through the doorway, tumbling into the light, feeling the cold grip of despair wane behind them. The world outside felt crisp and liberating against their skin, the emptiness of the forest surrounding the hotel starkly contrasting the suffocating air inside. But the laughter of the entity echoed faintly in the distance, a promise of return, reminding them that the darkness would always be lurking, always waiting for the opportune moment to reclaim what was lost. And in the fleeting seconds of freedom, they realized the nightmare would not end. It would follow them, haunt their dreams, waiting for the moment they would look back, ready to swallow them whole once more if they let their guard down. They stumbled into the cool night air, hearts racing, breathless from their escape. The moon hung high above, cold and pale, casting long, twisting shadows that crawled across the ground like searching fingers. But the moment of relief was fleeting, the chill in the air creeping beyond mere temperature, wrapping around them like an unwelcoming embrace. "Did we really escape?" she whispered, her voice quivering, glancing back toward the forsaken hotel. The darkness behind them loomed larger, the outline of the building becoming a malevolent presence against the starlit sky. A shiver coursed through her as she thought she saw movement in the windows, faint silhouettes flitting between curtains that danced like specters. As they took a tentative step away, the trees surrounding the lot whispered, branches creaking in a language only they could understand, secrets carried by the wind. The forest felt alive, every rustle sounding like a warning, every snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot. Shadows twisted and morphed, playing tricks on their eyes, hiding whatever nightmares lurked just out of sight. They began walking, but the path quickly faded into thick underbrush, dense and choking, as if trying to pull them back to where they dared not go. Maybe we should go back, he suggested hesitantly, glancing over his shoulder. The remnants of the hotel seemed to pulse with a heart of its own, a dark thrum that beat in time with their panicked pulses. Are you crazy? She snapped, fear slicing through her voice. We'll die in there? But there was something in his expression, a flicker of doubt that spoke of the uncertainty gnawing at them both. Shadows jibed and taunted, each fleeting shape today morphing into an echo from the hotel, which thrummed with a life they could not understand. Unseen eyes seemed to watch their every move as they ventured further into the forest. Suddenly, a piercing howl erupted from somewhere deep in the woods, freezing them in place. It sounded both animalistic and human at once, a mix that sent ice through their veins. In response, the trees grew denser, branches intertwining above their heads to form a gnarled archway that felt like a threshold to some forbidden realm. The howl echoed again, louder this time, closer, sending a chill down their spines. Then the footsteps began, soft at first, like a child's playful chase. They crept through the underbrush, growing louder with each passing second. A part of him wanted to believe it was just a trick of the night, their minds playing games after what they had endured. But another part of him, the one powered by primal instincts, told him to run. We need to hurry, he stammered, glancing around for a clue, guidance, anything that might tell them which way to escape this suffocating darkness that clung to them. But the oppressive silence returned, thickening the air until it felt almost solid. They moved cautiously, adrenaline coursing through their bodies, but each step stirred the underbrush, creating a cacophony of noise that seemed to taunt their fear. Leaves crackled underfoot as they pressed deeper into the forest, the surrounding shadows chasing them relentlessly. Glimpses of movement caught the corner of their eyes, phantasms flitting just outside their line of vision, darting among the trees, mocking their efforts to flee. The howling sounded again, echoing through the night, followed by a low rumble that vibrated in their bones. What the hell is that? She gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. Before he could answer, a figure burst from the underbrush, a gaunt human shape, its eyes sunken and wild, skin pallid as if drained of life. Help me, it shrieked, clawing at them with trembling fingers, a hollow grin stretching across its face. But there was something wrong. Its movement was jerky, limbs bending unnaturally. They recoiled, stepping back, hearts pounding in unison. No, he shouted, pulling her away from the apparition. But the figure kept coming, eyes alive with a maniacal desperation, pleading for assistance. And yet, something sinister lurked just beneath the surface, a malevolence that sent waves of dread crashing through him. As they turned to flee, branches snapped dangerously close, and they felt the presence behind them swell, the shadow closing in. The heart of the forest felt like it was alive, hungry, searching. Shadows elongated and shifted, morphing into shapes that seemed to whisper their names, taunting them with promises of what awaited if they fell into the darkness once more. This way, she called, grabbing his wrist, panic guiding her instincts as they veered off the faint path into the denser part of the woods, where the trees stood like sentinels, their gnarled roots twisting and reaching like hands striving to hold on to what was real. Just as they began to feel a hint of safety, they stumbled upon an ancient stone well, half hidden by the undergrowth. The air above it shimmered with an unsettling energy, a feeling like static that set their skin on edge. Should we look inside? He whispered breathlessly, peer over the edge into the abyss. She shook her head fiercely, stepping back instinctively. But the well called to them in a way, an ancient song that whispered of secrets buried deep within its dark confines. Then came the sound of laughter, soft at first, like the tinkling of wind chimes, but it turned sinister. The laughter morphed into something cruel and mocking, echoing around them, amplified by the trees, intertwined with the rustling leaves, a disembodied cacophony that made their skin crawl. The shadows gathered again, swirling around the well, pouring forth like a tide, tendrils reaching toward them with an insatiable hunger. "We need to get away from here," he yelled, snatching her hand with urgency, but she was transfixed by the well, its mouth gaping wide, beckoning her near. The laughter melded with the whispers of the shadows, a chorus promising to show her everything, the truth she sought, the lost pieces of herself. But deep in her gut, something screamed to run, to resist the seductive pull of the darkness still lurking beneath the surface. Suddenly, a small figure emerged from the well, a child, its eyes wide and hollow, the remnants of what once might have been innocence covered by a thin sheen of darkness. "Help me," it croaked, reaching out with bony fingers that beckoned toward the depths below. The child's voice was a haunting echo, resonating with the ancient malevolence that prowled the woods. "Don't go near it," he cried, wrestling her away from the edge as the air thickened with an oppressive weight. The laughter turned to wails, angry and despairing, filling the space around them with a resonance of pain that curled around their hearts. Shadows began to break apart and rush forward, flowing like quicksilver to reclaim what was theirs, threatening to pull them both back into an abyss of nightmares. Mirroring the cold sweat of the forest, she felt the primal fear rise in her throat, choking her words as the moonlight cast ghostly silvery fingers around the edge of the well, illuminating the outlines of faces twisted in agony, mouths opening in silent screams frozen in time. They were lost souls, trapped and chained to the very principles of despair, begging for someone, anyone, to join them. And all at once, he made a decision. "We're leaving," he shouted without looking back, turning toward the inky abyss of trees that loomed beyond the well. They raced into the heart of the woods, the laughter fading behind them, replaced by the echo of a desperate wail that gripped the darkness with vengeance. The woods moved differently now, twisted branches reaching out, the ground uneven and treacherous, as though the very earth was trying to stop them. But they pressed on, fear morphing into determination as they forged ahead, leaving behind the clawing shadows that sought to drag them back. With each step, the world around them shifted. Branches whispered their names, and the air thickened with regret. Memories of those who had once roamed these woods now trapped in a cycle of despair. Just as they thought they were beyond the reach of the malevolence, a sudden cold seized their hearts. In that moment of stillness, shadows united once more, swirling at their feet, coiling up their legs like serpents, entrapping them in a devouring darkness. The laughter returned, echoing from every direction, blending with the cries of 1,000 lost souls. There was no escape. "Fight it," he yelled, the remnants of their hope wavering, but he grasped her hand tight, forcing every ounce of will into those words. The shadows twisted around them, but at that moment, they found the strength in their bond, the warmth of life against the cold claws of death. Tightening their grip against the encroaching darkness, they began to run once more, their breath hitching in their chests, heart pounding like a war drum. Together, they ran deeper into the wilderness, deeper into the uncertainty of what lay ahead, knowing with each passing moment they teetered on the brink of horror. Each glance back only fueled their desperation, those unnatural eyes watching, mocking them, waiting for just a moment of weakness. An impending sense of doom filled the air, causing their every step to echo louder than the last, rattling the very branches that reached for them as they traversed through the nightmarish landscape filled with whispers and laughter that would haunt them long after this night. An invisible force pressed harder, pushing them both toward a critical end, their escape or their doom. As they ran, the shadows began to converge, a confluence of rage and despair forming the heart of a great storm. And they knew then that the forest would rarely release its grip, holding tighter than before, waiting for their exhaustion, when finally they would yield to the darkness and the gloom. With their breaths ragged and their hearts beating in synchrony, they prepared themselves for whatever lay ahead, knowing they could not allow the shadows to consume them. Not again. Together, they plunged deeper into the unknown, driven forward by fear and their unyielding bond. And though every instinct told them to run, they could not dismiss the ominous sense that they were not alone in this cursed embrace. The doom closing in, a promise of a reckoning still to come. The further they ventured, the shadows began to morph around them, thickening like a heavy fog that clung to their skin and made every tree look like a looming specter, twisted and gnarled. They felt eyes watching from the dark, invisible spies lurking just beyond their line of sight. The air was heavy with whispers that rose and fell like a dark wind, curling around them, wrapping around their throats like tendrils of nightmares long forgotten. Suddenly, the ground shifted underfoot. What once felt solid now swayed like the sea. Vines burst forth from the soil, thick and sinewy, binding their ankles and drawing them closer to the earth. Each struggle only seemed to deepen their entrapment, roots clawing and clawing, holding fast as the laughter of the forest returned, now louder, a sinister symphony that echoed through the trees. Those ghastly sounds laughed at their fear, feeding off it, making it grow and swell within the shadows that writhed with dark delight. "What's happening?" she gasped, her voice barely audible over the cacophony that surrounded them. Panic danced in her eyes as she twisted her foot, trying to shake off the creeping vines that felt alive. The forest seemed to respond, swaying, leaning in as if gloating over their terror, eager to consume them whole. Those sinister faces emerged again from the shadows, weaving and bobbing within the trees, whispering their secrets in a language lost to time. Some bore features resembling animals, with hollow eyes glimmering like shards of broken glass, while others appeared to be human, mouths twisted into grotesque grins that hinted at insanity. "We must keep moving," he yelled, adrenaline surging through him like fire, yanking desperately on her arm. The moment he freed her, the grounds began to tremble beneath them, as if the earth itself was angry for their defiance. Gnarled roots circled around them, pulling and clawing like skeletal hands reaching desperately for their next meal. In the distance, the moon hung low, casting a silvery light over a clearing where the trees parted, revealing ancient stone ruins that jutted out like broken teeth. They both stopped, breathless for a split second, mesmerized by the sight. Disfigured stones were covered in strange carvings, images of twisted faces locked in perpetual agony, eyes wide and mouths screaming silently, as if trapped in a horrific dance with the darkness that surrounded them. Before either of them could react, a series of distant thuds echoed through the woods, each one sending vibrations through their bodies. It was a rhythm, drumming on the edge of their consciousness with an urgency that felt almost sentient, like the heartbeat of the forest calling to them, desperate for something, or perhaps someone, to answer its call. As they stood paralyzed by fear, the air shimmered in front of them, like a mirage rising off a desert floor. A figure slowly materialized from the dark, shrouded in shadows, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "You cannot escape," a voice croaked, hollow and ethereal, wrapping around them like smoke. The figure wore a tattered cloak, blending seamlessly with the shadows, a cruel smile stretching across its face. Its eyes, voids of darkness, bore into them, pinning them in place as the air thickened, making it hard to breathe. The forest fell eerily silent, the shadows whispering in anxious anticipation, all eyes now focused on the newcomers with a hunger that was palpable. As the figure stepped closer, they could see more details, disjointed limbs that moved awkwardly, as if its joints did not bend like those of the living, and a face that seemed to shift between 1,000 expressions. Fear, anger, despair, reflecting all the emotions of the tormented. Fragments of forgotten screams echoed in the air, the melody of suffering wrapped around them like an embrace. Desperation settled heavily within his chest, as his mind screamed at him to flee, to run as fast as they could from this horror that had come to greet them. "Join us," it whispered again, voice drenched in honeyed malice, a twisted invitation that sent chills racing down their spines. "You will be part of this realm, part of the darkness, forever, living in the agony of those who came before you." Suddenly, the ground around the ruins pulsed, rippling like a living thing, and from it emerged dozens of skeletal hands, fingers clawing up through the earth, reaching for anything they could grasp. A surge of adrenaline shot through him, and he grabbed her hand once more. "Run!" he shouted, leading her away from the horror spilling forth from the ruins, the laughter that rose around them growing cacophonous as it twisted into something more animalistic, feral, almost triumphant. The figures down below shrieked and howled, those wretched souls trapped and bound by the darkness that held them. Racing through the trees, they could feel the weight of the forest press in on them, the shadows fighting to reclaim their souls with every beat of their hearts. Branches slashed against them like whips, leaves tearing at their clothing, the ground uneven and treacherous as they stumbled and tripped over roots and rocks, eyes sharp for the horrors that hunted them. Then they saw it, a faint glimmer in the distance, light breaking through the thick canopy overhead. Hope ignited within him, pushing him onward despite the overwhelming dread that enveloped them. It was a clearing, a space where the trees parted like a curtain. Just ahead was salvation. But the pulsating shadows churned with increasing agitation, the forest fighting back against their escape, twisting and bending the landscape as if trying to reshape reality, eager to keep them ensnared within its haunting embrace. As they neared the light, the ground shifted violently, causing them to buck and roll. He caught her as she nearly fell, pulling her back to her feet. They pressed forward, but the darkness was relentless, tendrils snaking around their ankles again, trying to drag them back into the forest's hungry clutches. In that moment of sheer panic, the world blurred around them, the darkness shifting into nightmarish figures that danced beyond their sight, laughing and whispering promises of despair, the very fabric of the forest alive with the misery of the forgotten. "This can't be real," she cried as the air seemed to shrink, compressing them tighter within its vice. "We have to believe we can get out. We will." He gritted his teeth, determination surging within him, even as despair gnawed at the edges of his resolve. He could feel the pull of the shadows getting stronger, their whispers now a piercing cacophony that drowned out their thoughts, each promise a snare designed to trap them. And then, as they broke through the last barrier of trees, the clearing opened wide before them, bathed in the moonlight. It was idyllic, yet cursed. In the center stood a massive stone altar, slick with moisture, dark stains marking its surface like blood. Eyes, dozens of them, peered out from every crevice of the stone, shimmering in the light while obscured by shadow. They blinked slowly, unyielding in their scrutiny, as if judging their worthiness to escape. The air crackled with tension, a static energy threatening to snap. They hesitated at the edge of the clearing, the whispers growing stronger, demanding they step into that space, that terrible threshold. "What if we can't leave?" she murmured, voice trembling. "We have to try," he insisted, gripping her hand tightly as they stepped into the moonlight, the light illuminating the horrors that lay behind them, the specters' watches with insatiable hunger. Once inside the clearing, time shifted. The world felt unfocused, forced into a blurry realm where shadows wove together. The altar pulsed with a life of its own, energy ebbing and flowing like a heartbeat, beckoning them closer, wrapped in the guise of sanctuary. But something deep within him screamed otherwise. They were walking into a trap, a final attempt by the forest to claim them for the forgotten, lost souls offering a chilling welcome. As they stood there, the laughter returned, echoing through the night, layered with cries of those who had come before. The stones began to shift, moving together like a living puzzle, sealing off any chance of retreat. Their hearts raced as the shadows converged, swirling in anticipation, eager to ensnare their final prey. And in that moment of sheer terror, a brilliant flash of light erupted from the altar, momentarily blinding them. As their vision cleared, they saw the figures materializing around the stones, ethereal and naked, each face contorted in agony, yet somehow beautiful in their despair. It was a mesh of victims etched forever in time, pleading silently to be freed but bound to the earth. "Join us," they wailed, their voices a haunting melody that crawled into their minds, sinking deep into their consciousness, relentless in their pleas. The shadows writhed closer, twisting in and around them, while hands reached out, ghostly, cold, dragging them into the frozen grip of the past. In that instant, he knew they were at the nexus of despair, the heart of the curse, and all he could do was hold on to her, the warmth of their connection anchoring them against the frigid touch of the shadows, refusing to let go, refusing to surrender to the darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. The cries grew louder, the voices merging into a deafening choir of sorrow that echoed in the hollow spaces of their minds. Each note cut sharper than the last, clawing at the edges of their sanity, dragging memories of lost moments, fears, and regrets to the forefront. He caught glimpses of what the forest had stolen, bright smiles fading into twisted faces, laughter dying into whispers of despair. As he stood there, paralyzed, a faint glow emanated from the altar, flickering in rhythm with their heartbeats, drawing closer like a predator stalking its prey. The figures surrounding them began to combine, morphing into a singular entity formed from sorrow and darkness. It flickered like an old film reel, images of them crashing together and pulling apart, their past colliding with their present in a horrifying tableau. A chilling wind swept through the clearing. The temperature dropped, pulling away the warmth from their skin, chilling them to the core. He could almost feel the spirit's despair clinging to him, messy and suffocating. Just then, the shadows began to twist and coalesce around them, forming grotesque shapes that resembled monstrous versions of their most feared memories, and he realized they were not alone. They were being watched. "We have to go," he whispered urgently, tugging her closer. But as he turned to escape, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The shadows thickened, wrapping around their ankles, like the slow, deliberate tightening of a noose. Each pulse of energy from the altar resonated through the earth, sending waves of cold dread washing over them. The entities surrounding them whispered promises of power, seducing them with the idea of dominance over their past fears, their nightmares brought to life, wrapping around them like a sick comfort blanket. Suddenly, the figures before them lunged, icy hands reaching through the air, grasping for their skin. He barely had time to react when one of the apparitions, a skeletal visage with hollow eye sockets, bore down upon him, its mouth elongated into a ghastly grin. It opened wide, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the very light around them. He could feel the pull of its grasp, strong and relentless, as its whispers of despair flooded his mind. "Join us, be one with the darkness." He pushed back against the encroaching figure, heart racing, and for a moment he thought he saw the shadowed spirits ripple, their grotesque forms displaying flickers of recognition. It was as if they remembered him, as if he had once been part of this woeful collection. The realization sent another wave of dread crashing into him, tightening the knot of terror in his stomach. "It knows us," he breathed, panic rising in his chest. No, it couldn't be true. But her grip around his hand faltered. She gasped as another figure loomed behind her, a woman whose body appeared fluid, shifting like smoke. Yet her eyes were wide and pleading, reflecting the very essence of despair that filled the clearing. "Help me," she cried, voice breaking. "Please don't let it take you too." He turned to her, fear thinly masking the anger rising in him. "Don't listen to them. They just want to drag us down." But she was transfixed, her eyes locked on the tormented figure. The shadows encroached upon them more fiercely now, clawing and reaching, wanting to consume, wanting to merge. "Stay with me," he cried, yanking her backward, feeling the heat of panic roll off of her. The air thickened as her gaze shifted to him, the fight in her eyes flickering like a candle in the wind. And just as the figures began to close in around them, an otherworldly roar ripped through the clearing, shaking the ground violently. The darkness quivered, hesitating for one brief moment, and in that instant, he knew they had a chance. "Run," he commanded, adrenaline fueling his strength as he pulled her towards the abrupt edge of the clearing, where the moonlight broke through the overwhelming shadows. His instincts screamed at him to move, to flee from the horror that breathed down their necks. Together they tore towards the open space, the altar pulsating behind them, warping the very fabric of reality as it unleashed a crescendo of terrified wails. As they raced forward, the ground beneath them began to shift again, the soil itself turning into a sea of tangled roots that grasped at their feet like desperate hands trying to pull them back into the dark embrace of the forest. Each step was a battle, their ankles caught in the unyielding grip of the earth, as if the forest itself was a living monster trying to swallow them whole. Glancing back, the figures surged closer, their forms melding together in a chase of chaotic shapes, eyes burning with malevolence. He could see the skeletal face standing at the front, its grin widening, a terrifying beacon of dread leading the charge. It held a silent promise of suffering, urging them to relent and join the chorus of wretched souls eternally trapped in the forest's grip. "Faster," he yelled, breaking through the last remnants of the claustrophobic tendrils that held them back. The moonlight beckoned them closer, illuminating a path lined with shadows that twisted and writhed like serpents. Just ahead, the edge of the forest stood like a threshold to salvation, a fleeting promise of freedom wrapped in chilling uncertainty. But as they broke free, the shadows lunged after them, the air filled with a cacophony of wails, a sound that gripped their hearts with frigid fear. "You can't escape," the voices screeched, blending in with the wind's howl as the darkness threatened to overtake the very last bits of light left in their souls. Just as they burst into the open air, the altar behind them exploded with a blinding flash of light, momentarily dazzling their senses. Time slowed. The entire forest seemed to shudder, and he felt the weight of something monumental shift, as if the ground beneath their feet had released a breath it did not know it was holding. He stumbled, dragging her by sheer instinct as the brightened clearing blurred before them. Shadows erupted in his peripheral vision, forming monstrous shapes that lunged at them from the edges of the light, desperate to drag them back into the shadows, hoping to reclaim their prize. The world felt surreal as they ran, the sounds of the forest fading into an echo while the wails of despair morphed into furious screams. He could sense the figures scrambling behind, gaining speed, their howls morphing into something primal, almost feral, as they surged forward, their need for tragedy escalating. "This way, just a little farther," he urged, their freedom beckoning like a distant memory. And then, in a moment that balanced on the edge of oblivion, they reached the edge of the forest, where the dark trees peeled away to reveal an expanse of open land bathed in the glow of stars, flickering like lost souls in the blackness of night. The clearing ahead looked almost peaceful, an oasis free from the horrors that lingered in the depths of the woods. But he knew better. There was no escaping the forest's reach. Just as relief began to wash over them, an icy grip snatched at his shoulder, a claw-like hand that sent spikes of terror racing through him. He turned to see the skeletal figure lunging, its mouth stretching wide, a deafening scream on its lips, the ground trembling as the air vibrated with a storm of dark intent. It was a final attempt to reclaim them, an embodiment of everything that had trapped souls for eons. "Keep running," he shouted, urgency fueling his every word, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he felt the breath of the darkness hot on his back. The moonlight illuminated the way, flickering as if it were playing a cruel game, while the hill loomed ahead like a mountain of salvation. Tearing across the uneven ground, every ounce of his being screamed to push harder, to escape the ever-growing darkness. But the figure was relentless, claws scratching at his flesh as shadows swirled around him, whispering promises of power and knowledge. Yet deep down, he knew it was a trap. The pain shot through him, fraying the edges of his mind, and just as the shadows seized him, the world erupted in a cacophony of light, blinding and pure. In the brilliance, time fractured. He felt suspended in a moment where light and dark collided, his heartbeat echoing in his ears like thunder. Everything around him began to pulse, the very air saturated with an energy that felt both alive and malicious. The brightness was almost blinding, casting long shadows that flickered like restless spirits against the ground. His feet skidded as he stumbled forward, unsure if he was stepping into salvation or straight into hell. Then, with a chilling crack, The light blinked out, plunging him into darkness. Thick shadows swallowed him whole, suffocating him in their embrace. It wasn't just dark. It was an oppressive void that no amount of light could penetrate. He turned to find her, panic surging through him, but she was gone. Just like that, a whisper of hope evaporated into the night, leaving behind only despair. No, he gasped, the words swallowed by the abyss surrounding him. He strained to see, his hands reaching out into the gloom, searching for a familiar touch or a glimpse of her face. The air was heavy and stale, thick with the scent of damp earth and something sweetly rotten. A distant echo slithered through the silence, the fading sounds of whispers blending into a cacophony of overlapping voices, each one laced with agony and longing. The chilling feeling of being watched crept over him, like icy fingers tracing the nape of his neck, sending shivers down his spine. Shadows writhed at the edge of his vision, their movement both unsettling and hypnotic, darting just beyond the reach of his sight. Memories flashed before him, vivid and cruel, the faces of those who had been lost, their expressions twisted in torment, silently pleading for help that never came. The whispering grew louder, almost coherent, a snarl of desperation that wrapped around him. "You shouldn't have come here." The words slithered through the darkness, chilling him to the bone. Each syllable seemed to curl around him, tightening his chest and squeezing his lungs. He took a step back, only to stumble over something soft and yielding, a mass that shifted beneath his weight. He looked down, horrified. An old, decaying hand reached out from the earth. He was too paralyzed with fear to scream, frozen in the grip of something unseen. The ground began to pulse like a beating heart, thrumming underfoot, dragging him down closer to the source of the darkness. The hand twisted and curled, desperately seeking purchase, dragging itself further into the lightless void. "Help me!" The voice was faint, yet it reverberated through the air, mingling with the cacophony of tortured souls. He tried to pull away, but the ground shifted again, the earth juddering violently beneath him. Roots and branches burst upward, grasping at his ankles, anchoring him in place with a grip that felt like iron. Frantic energy surged through him, igniting every nerve ending. "I need to get out," he yelled, fighting against the tendrils that clutched him. The darkness thickened around him as if the forest itself were alive, a creature feeding off his fear. The whispers transformed into shrieks, the cacophony escalating into a discordant symphony of anguish. They echoed in his mind, pulling at him, trying to tear him apart. "Join us," they cried, their voices intertwining into a ghastly harmony that resonated within his very soul. Then, a faint flicker of light appeared in the distance, a beacon amid the smothering black. He locked onto it, desperate for escape. Pulling against the grip of the twisted roots, he wrenched himself free with a primal roar, fueled by pure desperation. The shadows recoiled, momentarily allowing him passage as he staggered toward the glow. But the moment was fleeting. With each step he took, the shadows swelled again, writhing like angry serpents seeking vengeance. Deep inside the murky depths of the forest, he caught sight of movement, like smoke curling and twisting. A figure materialized, draped in a shroud that shimmered unsettlingly, its features obscured. "You can't run from this," it whispered, a velvet voice that slithered into his ears, wrapping around his thoughts. "You were chosen just like us." The realization crashed over him with a dreadful weight. This presence could have been one of those lost souls. Yet there was a twisted serenity in its gaze, a tranquility marred by grief and regret. As the figure stepped closer, the ground trembled beneath him. The light glowed stronger. Yet the darkness thickened, merging with the light until he could hardly tell what was real. Waves of sorrow washed over him, memories colliding with nightmare. "Don't you see?" it continued, a smile playing across its shadowy lips. "Embrace it. Join the forest." Suddenly, the shadows lunged again, seizing his limbs, pulling him down into the earth. He kicked and twisted, trying to break free, to escape the darkness that threatened to consume him whole. At that moment, fear ignited inside him, raw and primal. He would not become one of them. With a surge of determination, he tore free from the grasping shadows, sprinting toward the flickering light that felt more like a lie with each passing moment. Yet the shadows were relentless, swirling around him, enveloping him like a shroud of despair. They intensified, growing heavier, whispering dark secrets in his ears, taunting him with each step he took. You will never escape this place. We are your past, your future. The echo of his own voice rang hollow, lost amongst the cries. He saw flashes of long-buried memories surge forth, stop from the corner of his eye. The faces of the people he had wronged, of the people he had loved, twisted into grotesque masks of anguish and betrayal. Their fingers stretched out toward him, yearning for connection. But as he reached back, their forms dissolved, replaced by the chilling laughter of the shadowed figures surrounding him. You belong to us now. Dread coiled around his heart. He doubled his pace, desperately chasing the light, but it seemed to recede with each step he took. Just ahead, a flicker of movement caught his eye, her silhouette fleeting and pale like a wisp of smoke. Help, he called, voice cracking. I'm here. Her form flickered, wavering like a candle in the wind, stretched between realities. She turned, eyes wide with fear, but the darkness slithered behind her, eager to snatch her away. Don't let it take you, he shouted, extending his hands towards her. For a moment, their eyes locked, and he saw the reflection of the horrors they faced within her gaze. It mirrored his own suffering, a bond forged through shared fear. But the shadows were growing bold, wrapping around her wrists like iron shackles, reeling her in. The grin of the skeletal figure resurfaced behind her, clawing through the shadows, its grotesque mouth stretching, hungry for despair. Join us, it shrieked, the voices of the forest growing deafening, echoing through the vast chambers of his mind. In that moment, clarity struck him like lightning. No, we will not fall. His voice rang out, authoritative and fierce, cutting through the cacophony. With a swift motion, he lunged toward her, throwing his body against the dark. A shock of pain shot through him as the shadows clawed at him, but he pressed on. The moment his fingers brushed against hers, a bolt of energy surged through their connection, igniting a spark of resistance against the encroaching darkness. The shadows recoiled, hissing in anger, voices rising in a furious crescendo. You cannot escape, they screamed in a blend of rage and sorrow, but the light around them flickered again, responding to their defiance. The air thickened, swirling with energy, the very essence of their determination pushing back against the shift towards despair. Together, they began to stride forward, hand in hand, a beacon of defiance against the monstrous darkness. But as they moved, shapes began to coalesce around them, not just shadows but figures, twisted, tortured souls with eyes full of torment. They encircled them, a haunting chorus of despair. Each figure bore a face of someone he recognized, somebody who had been lost to the depths. You cannot outrun us. You will join us. The ground quaked violently beneath their feet as the essence of the forest surged, determined to drag them into its depths. Screams filled the air, mingling together in a sickening harmony, promising an eternity of suffering. He felt the temperature drop, a wave of icy despair washing over him as he and her were drawn nearer to the edge of the abyss, like moths to a flame. And in that moment, as the shadows danced and the figures reached for them, he knew they had to do something bold that would shatter the bindings of despair that sought to claim them. With a surge of defiance, he shouted again, his voice breaking through the chaos. We will not be part of your nightmare. He pushed forward, channeling every ounce of his will, desperately wanting to break free. The ground beneath them bucked with rage, illuminated with flashes of hostile light as the figures grew more agitated, shimmering into view and then dissolving, tantalizingly close yet eternally out of reach. Just a few more steps, they could reach the flickering light. The air crackled with tension, each step an act of defiance against the churning shadows and the rising dread that clawed at their sanity. In a final act of rebellion, he pressed his palms together with hers, conjuring every memory of joy, every whisper of hope. The light around them flared as their shared warmth surged, illuminating the entire clearing, banishing the gloom that hung like a shroud. The oppressive fears, the striving darkness, seemed to retreat, pulling back just enough for the glimmer of their resolve to flint into a flame. The figures recoiled, wavering between realities, as if caught in a violent storm. That moment became solid, an unbreakable bond igniting within the horizon, pulling at the shadows. They screamed, anger mingling with terror, and the darkness around them shrieked, a cacophony of rage and loss. "We are not alone," he shouted, channeling his intent into the air, feeding the dramatic energy around them. Each word became a rallying cry, rippling like a shockwave through the atmosphere, knocking the shadows back like waves against a shore. The figures writhed in agony, their visages twisting, caught between anguish and desperation. Yet still, they surged, trying to envelop them in a final push. But he would not surrender. "We have fought for too long to be claimed by you," he howled, his voice ringing with defiance, shaking the forest itself as the light surged brighter, a blinding beacon of hope against the suffocating darkness surrounding them. And then abruptly everything shifted. With one last surge of strength, the ground let go, uprooting the tangled tendrils that had bound them. He felt it beneath his feet, the earth quaking violently as if acknowledging their defiance, as the world darkened around them, creating one final image before everything shattered. A pair of eyes pierced through, their eyes alive with longing and fear, yet undeniably free. Together, they stepped through the light, escaping the grasp of the malevolent forest that had tried to claim them. As they left the shadows behind, a deafening silence enveloped them, the whispers fading into memory, leaving only the echo of their hearts racing in the aftermath of their triumph. Yet somewhere deep down, he felt the shadows lingering, a dark promise waiting to be fulfilled. Even as they emerged, battered and weary, they knew this battle was just the beginning. Shadows may recede, but they would return. And the darkness always finds a way back. As they stepped through the last remnants of the light, relief flooded their veins, but an unsettling chill skittered down their spines. The forest around them shifted, the vibrant hues swallowed by inky shadows. The weight of the darkness was palpable, a coiling tension that made every breath feel heavy. They exchanged wary glances, every instinct screaming that the reprieve was just an illusion. Behind them, the gnarled branches twisted like skeletal fingers, scratching at the air as if to reclaim them. A low rumble echoed through the trees, growing louder, reverberating in their chests. With every step they took further into the woods, the air thickened, and the shadowy figures on the edge of the light seemed to morph into roiling smoke, suffocating the very space around them. They walked faster, hearts thundering, the path narrowing as the underbrush closed in. Whispers, soft and sinister, began to curl around them. "Come back! You belong here!" The words snaked around their ankles, pulling at them with an almost physical force, weaving through the light that desperately flickered and ebbed. He could feel the pressure increasing in his mind, like wisps of madness creeping in with every breath they took. His pulse quickened, each heartbeat echoing the whispers of the past, clawing at the fragile barrier between sanity and its edge. Then, without warning, the ground lurched beneath their feet. Roots erupted like serpents, dragging them down. He stumbled, grasping for her hand, but the treacherous earth hardened, locking him in a place, and she was suddenly yanked away. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking, echoing in the suffocating silence that returned as swiftly as it had been broken. She was swallowed by the encroaching dark, her scream muffled, a fleeting shadow lost to the depths of the hellish forest. Panic surged through him, heart racing, as shadows danced excitedly around her disappearing form, feasting off his dread. Each screech echoed in the stillness, a mocking chorus of anguish. Blind to the way, his instincts took over, propelling him forward as he pushed against the earth that threatened to consume him whole. The murmurings shifting around him felt both familiar and foreign, like a warped lullaby that wrapped around him, lulling him deeper into the unending night. He stumbled through the trees, their bark twisting into grotesque faces that leered at him, eyes glinting with malevolent glee. "You can't escape," they hissed, their voices a sickly sweet serenade. A deluge of shadows swept past, pulling leaves from branches and swirling around them like ominous storm clouds. Each gust carried the scent of decay, heavy and earthy, filling his lungs with an oppressive weight. He pressed on, desperate to reach the very essence of the light that shimmered distantly, taunting him with the promise of safety. But the deeper he delved into the wilderness, the heavier the darkness pooled around his ankles, clawing and clinging. Suddenly, a loud crack broke the air, and he froze. A figure emerged from the depths, a woman with sunken cheeks and hollow eyes, her skin pallid, both eerily radiant and horrific. She appeared as if she were woven from the very fabric of shadow itself, flickering in and out of existence. With a ghastly smile, she stretched her fingers toward him, beckoning in an alluring fashion, yet the invitation was clearly sinister. "Stay with us?" Her whispers dripped with a honeyed cadence, gradually transforming into piercing shrieks that ricocheted off the trees, twisting the air with a discordant melody that rattled his bones. He shook his head, backing away, heart pounding as horror coursed through him. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice raw, searching for any hint of hope. Her laughter rang through the trees, a sound that made the forest shudder. "You think you can save her? The forest has claimed her. She is ours now." In that moment, something shifted. The landscape warped and stretched as if reality itself were breaking apart at the seams. The ground opened up, revealing an abyss from which echoes of the damned wailed hungrily. Souls trapped in eternal torment, their faces contorted with despair, sightless eyes searching, reaching, grasping for release. He stumbled back, the air thickening, wrapping around him like a shroud. The woman's grin twisted into something dark and monstrous, teeth sharp and dagger-like, as the shadows around her thickened, drawing closer. "Join us," she cooed, her voice warm yet ice-cold. "You too can be beautiful in despair. Find peace in the darkness." Behind her, shapes surged, apparitions swirling around him, some bearing the familiar faces of loved ones, twisted into expressions of sorrow and rage. They cried out, their voices merging with the whispers of the forest, a haunting symphony of grief that clanged against his heart like a death knell. Goosebumps prickled over his skin as he felt their lingering longing, a sharp ache that gnawed away at his resolve. His mind raced, thoughts colliding, memories threatening to unravel the very fabric of his sanity. "Leave her alone," he shouted, desperate for clarity, pushing against the encroaching shadows. But the woman lunged forward, her form flickering in and out like flames yearning for air. Dark strands of energy spiraled from her, wrapping around him with unsettling intimacy. Her eyes glimmered with a madness that spoke of ages lost to darkness, memories twisted by despair. "You can't fight what you are, what you will become. Embrace it," she urged, voice dripping with sickly sweet temptation as the shadows surged closer, drawn by his fear. Panic clawed at his chest. Each breath grew heavier. He felt the hatred seep into his bones, a thick fog that clouded his thoughts, suffocating the remnants of hope. He could not let this dark enchantment suffocate him. He took a deep breath, focusing, reaching back into the fleeting memories of light and joy they had shared before the shadows claimed her. The joy, the laughter echoed vividly in his mind and started to illuminate the suffocating atmosphere around him. "No," he yelled, gathering every ounce of remembrance, pulling forth those moments like lifelines. His voice rang out, fierce and unyielding, as he summoned the warmth of their connection. "I will not let you take us." The air cracked as he unleashed a surge of energy, snapping through the shadows, igniting the very darkness that pressed against him. Light exploded from his chest, cascading over the twisted bodies of nightmares, illuminating the forest in blinding brilliance. The woman shrieked, the sound guttural and feral, as the shadows recoiled, shriveling under the brightness. For a moment, he caught a glimpse of her true form, a frightened girl trapped within a monstrous shell. His heart twisted at the sight, a frail wisp of a being lost within the horror. "Help me," she cried, desperation clawing through her voice, eyes softening before the darkness obscured her once more. But he was losing focus, the light wavering as the shadows surged again, threatening to engulf him in their malevolent embrace. He closed his eyes, centering himself, grounding against the encroaching fear, clutching to the memories, the warmth of their bond. In that moment, he realized the truth. The shadows thrived on despair, but love revealed light. Thus, he let the light surge again, pushing back with newfound urgency, extending his hand towards the darkness, weaving the threads of their connection into the very fabric of the forest. "Together," he roared, "we are stronger together." The light sublimated into brilliance as the shadows writhed, their cries mingling with the chaotic symphony of the night, a tempest swirling around him. He felt the warmth of her presence return, flickering like a beacon within the oppressive dark. "We will find our way back," he declared, but as hope surged within him, strange shadows began to flood his mind. Images of nightmares unbidden, memories disintegrating into the ether. A shadowy portal opened nearby, and a cacophony of voices beckoned him toward it, sweetly seductive, whispering tales of power, of longing, and of a darkness that promised fulfillment. With each pulse, the light dimmed, battling against the weight of the forest, and an ancient presence tightened around him, coaxing him to drift into the abyss. "You can rule alongside us," it hissed, arousing a flood of temptation. "Embrace the dark. Let it consume you." He hesitated, the duality of salvation and condemnation battling within him, as he fought to hold onto the slim sliver of hope against the overwhelming onslaught of despair. Just then, as shadows twisted around them like serpents, threatening to engulf, a piercing wail erupted from within the darkness, a scream of anguished remorse echoing around him. It was her voice, a final plea that sliced through the air, resonating deep within him. "I am here. Don't let them win." A surge of clarity ignited his heart. He pushed forward, eliminating every whisper of doubt, racing back toward the flickering light that became solid and warm, the comforting glow that wrapped around them like a shield. "I won't let you fall. I won't let you go," he cried, the air around him thrumming with relentless energy. The shadows shrieked, furious and enraged, their forms dissipating under the brightness as he pushed toward that emerging star, straining against the clawing darkness that reared back, weary of their defiance. He could almost see her silhouetted against the light, almost tangible. "Fight," he urged, channeling raw energy through every fiber of his being, igniting the essence of their connection, a tether that bridged the abyss pulling them apart. With one final push, light surged outward, an explosion of radiant warmth battering the darkness away, revealing glimpses of the shadowed figures wilting under the brilliance. Screams morphed into anguished howls, swirling around them, receding into memory as he crashed into the light, her hand finally grasped in his. She blinked up at him, eyes wide with fear and relief, and together they surged, pushing toward the cleansing light. Yet, as they raced back through the enveloping darkness, a sinister rumble echoed past them, a promise of return, an unbroken bond forged in torment and despair. They burst into the clearing, but the shadows hounded them still, a relentless force, promising that this journey was far from over. Even with victory hanging on the horizon, the forest had awakened. A pulse of malevolence throbbed beneath the earth, surging with dark intent as the secrets of the woods stirred restlessly, preparing to unleash their wrath. And just like that, the darkness vowed its vengeance, and the battle for their souls began anew. They burst into the clearing, But the shadows hounded them still, a relentless force, promising that this journey was far from over. As the moon hung high, its cold light barely illuminated the grove, revealing the twisted trees, their gnarled branches curling like skeletal fingers eager to snatch at the two of them. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying a cacophony of anguished cries that chilled him to the bone, each sound a reminder of the horrors they had just escaped but not defeated. It felt as if the very air became thick with despair, wrapping around them like a choking shroud, suffocating and oppressive. In the distance, the dark shapes they thought they had left behind hunched low, shifting in the shadows, their eyes glowing like embers in the night. They moved with an unnatural grace, slipping between the trees, their forms distorting and melding into the darkness, as if they could taste the fear permeating the atmosphere. Each moment stretched into eternity as the figures crept closer, voices murmuring in a surreal symphony, taunting and beckoning, their tones a mixture of seduction and malice that clawed at his sanity. Those whispers promised dark secrets, twisted horrors wrapped in allure, and while he could barely make out the words, he understood the message. Surrender was inevitable. Panic surged in him, pushing him to grip her hand tighter. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges of his resolve. If they could just get away, if they could just make it out of the woods. But the ground beneath them began to pulse with a life of its own, the earth vibrating with a low growl, mirroring the threat that loomed above them. The trees swayed violently, branches creaking in protest, silhouettes of lost souls swirling just beyond reach, their faces distorted in silent pleas for help. Each flicker of movement ignited a primal fear within, as though the forest itself were watching, the dark heart of it all alive and hungry. Behind them, the shadows coalesced into a mass, shifting and churning like smoke, a swirling vortex of despair that threatened to consume not just their bodies, but their very souls. They could feel its icy breath on their necks, a darkness that promised to drag them back into the depths from whence they came. Each step forward felt heavier, the weight of their choices pressing down like 1,000 stones, memories of light and laughter now swallowed by the void. He could sense shadows creeping in the corner of his vision, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare, threatening to pull him under if he dared to look away. "Keep moving," he shouted, forcing his voice from the depths of his fear. But even as he spoke, the shadows morphed and twisted, erupting into whirling shapes that danced just out of reach. Her eyes reflected the fear that gripped his heart, but the flicker of determination still burned within. Together, they stumbled forward, tripping over the roots that clawed at their ankles, desperately seeking the safety of the forest's edge. But the deeper they ventured, the more the forest seemed to conspire against them, the ground softening beneath their feet, turning treacherous, as if trying to pull them down into its dark embrace. Suddenly, a bone-chilling screech ripped through the air, scattering birds from their perches, a cacophony of fluttering wings and startled cries. It bore the timbre of the earth's ancient anguish resonating through the trees, a keening so terrible it seized the breath in his throat. The shadows erupted, revealing claw-like hands grasping towards them, fingers elongated and twisted, desperate to drag them back into the night. The figures began to coalesce into ghastly familiar forms. His parents, long gone and rotting, their faces a grotesque mask of what once was, eyes hollowed out yet still full of sorrow, their mouths stretching into impossibly wide grins that chilled him to the core. "Join us," they echoed in unison, a chorus of mourning and longing that reverberated within the hollow of his chest, urging him to slip into the cocoon of despair. They extended their arms, fingertips brushing against the barrier of light around him, each touch leaving behind a trail of shadow that threatened to engulf him whole. "Don't fight it," whispered the fallen. "This is where you belong." Surges of anguish washed over him as memories flooded. Their laughter, warmth, the comfort of their embrace, all twisted into something dark and malevolent. The more he focused on their fading voices, the more he felt his strength wane, each heartbeat echoing louder, drowning out the sounds of his resolve. Yet he fought against the pull of memory, anchoring himself to her, to the promise of what still remained. His heart pounded with each step, but whispers seeped in like poison, reminding him of every lost moment, every tear shed, threatening to unravel the very fabric of his being. Just as despair threatened to engulf them, a piercing glare of light illuminated the grove. It was not just moonlight. It burned brighter, warmer, promising safety, a glimmer of hope amidst the horror. Together, they stumbled toward it, and the twisted form shrieked in rage, long fingers reaching out, grasping fruitlessly as the warmth enveloped them. Shadows writhed and twisted beyond the veil, their haunted cries a chilling reminder of the depths they had narrowly escaped. But as they crossed the threshold, a sense of foreboding danced at the edges of their euphoria. They could sense the darkness swirling hungrily behind them, an inextricable bond forged in pain. In the transitory light, the figures condensed into one last shadow, a grotesque amalgamation of all their fears, desires, and nightmares. It towered above them, its features shifting, an embodiment of sorrow and rage, distortion breathing life into pain. "You can never outrun us," it hissed, its voice echoing like a forgotten lullaby masked in malice, reverberating deep in his bones. Terror surged through him, knotting his chest as chilling laughter echoed through the trees, an unsettling refrain that whispered of promises unfulfilled and souls eternally lost. Drawing deep from their shared light, they heard the faintest immediate echoes of laughter, fading further as they fled, his heart hammering against the rising pulse of darkness behind them. Those voices began to twist, warping and changing into something sinister. And as the shadows started to merge with the ground, a terrible silence fell, the female figure's fingers stretching toward him, begging. "Don't go! Please don't leave!" she cried, and he glanced back, seeing the horror reflected in her eyes. But before he could respond, the shadows surged once more, an avalanche of grief and despair, threatening to engulf everything they had fought so hard to escape. He turned away, squeezing her hand with all his strength, feeling the heat of their bond surging against the overwhelming cold. And just as the grasping tendrils reached for them, both light and shadow collided in a blinding flash of energy that flooded the air with a piercing shriek. In that explosive moment, they were thrown back, tumbling through the void, their screams echoing, a wash of light brightening the darkness one last time before it descended, pulling them into the suffocating depths. Shadows morphed into 1,000 faces surrounding them, their chill slipping into his veins as the weight of hopelessness closed in, cloaking them in despair. And as consciousness slipped away, the last thing he felt was her hand slipping from his grip, the warmth fading into nothingness, leaving him alone in the endless dark as the whispers of the forest echoed around him, chanting a requiem for the souls that were never meant to escape.